She thought the worst thing waiting for her that night was the train. Wrong. The real disaster was the man waiting at home. And the real plot twist was the stranger in a cashmere coat who caught her before the floor did. Lena Carter collapsed as a broken nurse with nowhere left to run. But what she didn't know was this. The man who saved her wasn't offering 20 minutes of kindness. He was about to blow up the entire nightmare she called life.
When weariness and cruelty collide, survival is no longer an instinct, but a choice. A choice sometimes made by the hands of a stranger. Lena Carter had stopped expecting anyone to catch her. Not on that subway platform. Not in this life. But after 16 hours of mending others, with a man's temper waiting at home, it wasn't the cold ground that met her. It was him. Adrian Valente, a man who moved through a darkness she could never comprehend. What he saw in her bruised features that evening would alter the course of everything. She didn't know it yet, but being saved would be a far greater struggle than merely surviving. If her story calls to you, stay with us and tell us where her voice has reached you tonight. For 16 hours, the sterile lights of Mount C's emergency room had seared Lena's eyes. Her feet ached in shoes she couldn't afford to replace 3 months ago. The coffee she'd swallowed at hour 12 was now a bitter acid in her gut, and a tremor ran through her hands as she signed off on the last chart of a punishing double shift. "You look like hell, Carter," remarked Marcus, an ER doctor, as he moved past her desk. The words held a flicker of concern, but his feet never stopped. In this place, no one ever stopped. They were all just trying to stay afloat. "Thanks, Marcus. You're a real comfort." Her own voice was a monotone, devoid of the fight she once had. She used to find a joke, even when her bones were heavy with fatigue. But that was before Ethan, before her own apartment became a place of fear, and before living became the only prize she fought for. She punched out at 11:47 p.m., just 13 minutes shy of midnight, no longer counting the unpaid overtime. What was the use? The hospital was a skeleton crew. The city was hemorrhaging funds, and nurses like her were the sutures, expected to hold it all together until they broke. The November wind was a sharp slap as she stepped outside. It was cold enough to bite, but not yet cold enough for snow. Her thin, 3-year-old second-hand coat offered little defense against the wind howling down East 100th Street. The bus was the safer choice. It stopped just 2 blocks from her Washington Heights apartment, but the fare was $2.75, and her bank account held exactly $11.32 until Friday. The subway it would have to be. It took 12 minutes to walk to the 103rd Street station. Lena marked every second, partly to fend off the exhaustion, partly to silence thoughts of what awaited her. Ethan would be home. He was always home now. Since losing a construction job, he rarely attended. And he would be drinking. He was always drinking by this hour. And he would have questions about her night, about the men she was with, about why her job made her think she was better than him. His questions were never asked softly. A buzz from her pocket confirmed it. She didn't have to look. It was him. The vibrations had begun around the 14th hour of her shift. A barrage of messages, each one more venomous than the last, questioning her silence, accusing her of betrayals born from his own intoxicated paranoia. She'd learned weeks ago that responding to his texts only made it worse. Ignoring him did too, but silence at least bought her a few hours of quiet before she had to face the storm. The station seemed to inhale her whole. Yellowed tile walls wept with the grime of ages, and the air was thick with the scent of urine and hot steel. The distant shriek of a train could mean 2 minutes, or it could mean 20. For a Wednesday, the platform held a small crowd. A group of teenagers laughed loudly at one end. A man in a tired suit swayed on his feet, lost to drink or drugs. Two women in hospital uniforms of a different color leaned against a post, their words low and weary. Lena claimed a spot in the middle of the platform, letting her backpack drop to the concrete. The relief in her shoulders was immediate and sharp. Inside the bag lay her meager provisions: spare socks, an empty water bottle, 3 granola bars she'd rationed since Monday, and a paperback romance she hadn't found the will to open in 6 weeks. She once adored reading, escaping into worlds where all problems were solved within 300 pages. Life wasn't a novel. Life was this: a subway platform at midnight, an exhaustion so profound it felt like her bones were turning to dust, and a man at home who would likely greet her with his fists. And in 11 hours, she would have to do it all over again. The platform seemed to shift beneath her. Lena blinked, trying to chase the spreading darkness from her vision. When had she last eaten? The granola bar at 6? Or was that the day before? The days had begun to bleed into one another, a relentless cycle of work, fear, and a fatigue so deep it felt like a second skin. She should sit. The thought was strangely clinical, her own training listing the symptoms for her: dizziness, trembling hands, a cold sweat in the humid underground air. Her vision was tunneling, the classic signs of the platform bucked again, harder. No, a distant part of her mind registered. The platform wasn't moving. She was. Lena's knees gave out, and filthy ground rushed upward to claim her. In that split second, she thought how dirty the tiles would be, that her scrubs would be ruined, that Ethan would demand to know why she came home soiled. But she never made impact. Instead, there were hands, firm, certain, catching her, absorbing her weight as if it were nothing. For a moment, she wondered if she'd imagined the fall, a final trick of a broken mind. Then a voice cut through the fog. "Easy, I've got you." It was male, and it was calm. The kind of voice that knew no panic, that suggested he'd done this before, or at least found nothing about it surprising. Lena's vision cleared. She was upright, held steady by a stranger who had moved to intercept her collapse. Her first thought was of money. A wool coat, likely cashmere, that cost more than her rent. Leather shoes from a store she couldn't dare enter. A watch that splintered the dim station light into 1,000 tiny shards. Then her eyes found his face, and the clothes ceased to matter at all. He wasn't handsome, not in the traditional sense. His features were too severe for that. Sharp cheekbones casting deep shadows, a jawline that looked chiseled from stone, a nose that had met violence at least once. Dark hair was swept back from a face that held the years somewhere between 30 and 45. But it was his eyes that stole the air from her lungs. They were gray, the color of a gathering storm. Eyes that took in everything and revealed nothing. Eyes that were now taking the measure of her face, with a focus that made her want to flee. She couldn't. "You fainted?" the stranger observed, his tone level. It was a statement, not a question. "I'm fine." The lie was instinctual, a reflex honed by years of making herself smaller, less of a burden, easy to ignore. "You can let go now, I'm fine." His grip did not loosen. "When did you last eat?" The question was so sudden, so direct that she answered truthfully. 6, I think. A granola bar on my break." 6. He said the word as if it were a foreign concept. "It's almost midnight. I worked a double shift. That would explain the scrubs." His gaze traveled downward, clinical and detached, not predatory. It was a look she knew well, but this was an assessment, an inventory. When his eyes returned to her face, something in them had changed, and her stomach plummeted with a fear that had nothing to do with hunger. He saw them. The bruises, she had been so meticulous, the thick concealer around the eye, where Ethan's ring had split the skin 3 days ago, the long sleeves hiding the fingerprints on her arms, the turtleneck beneath her scrubs to hide where his hands had closed around her throat last week. But this man, in his fine coat and with his storm gray eyes, he had seen through her careful lies in less than 30 seconds. "I'm fine," Lena insisted, this time twisting from his grasp with enough force that he had to release her. She steadied herself against a nearby pillar. "Thank you for catching me. I was just dizzy. I'm fine." "That's the 3rd time you've said that?" He didn't step closer, but he didn't retreat. He simply stood 2 feet away, watching her with those all-seeing eyes. People who are truly fine rarely need to say it more than once. "Well, maybe I just wanted to be sure you got the message." "I got it." A beat of silence. "I just don't believe it." Further down the platform, the teenager's laughter echoed. The drunken man was now arguing with an invisible foe, and above them the city churned on. A symphony of sirens and horns, the unique and lonely chaos of New York after dark. Every instinct told Lena to flee, to grab her bag and dissolve into the platform's shadows, putting space between her and this man who saw too much. She should never have been standing here, letting him study her like a shattered object he meant to reassemble. But her bones felt like water, the dark spots still danced in her eyes, and moving even 10 feet seemed a journey too vast to undertake. "Which train are you waiting for?" The man's voice was a low hum. "An A train." Lena summoned a brittle edge to her words. "The A? It comes every 7 to 12 minutes at this hour if the MTA is feeling merciful." "You heading uptown to the Heights?" He inclined his head, a silent confirmation of some internal calculus. "That's a ride of 40 minutes at least. You'll collapse again long before you get there." "I won't." "You will." He didn't interrupt, so much as state a fact. His tone was not unkind, merely certain. "You're cold, your blood sugar is dangerously low, and the way you're holding your body tells me you're in a great deal of pain. You need warmth, nourishment, and a place to sit. You likely need a doctor too, but I suspect you would refuse." Lena could only stare. "Are you a physician?" "No." "Then perhaps you shouldn't be diagnosing people on subway platforms." A ghost of what might have been humor crossed his features. "A fair point, but it doesn't change the fact that I am right." And he was. That was the most infuriating truth of all. Lena could feel what little strength she had left pooling in her shoes. A deep chill was setting in, ignoring the station's stagnant warmth. Each ache and tender bruise began to scream now that the adrenaline had faded. She knew she would faint on the train. Or worse, she would arrive home awake and have to face Ethan in this fragile state. The stranger reached into his coat, producing a phone, a sleek, expensive device, the sort Lena had seen in the hands of surgeons. He typed a quick message, his gaze returning to her. "My car is 2 blocks away. My driver can be at the street entrance in 3 minutes. Let me take you for 20 minutes to get some food and rest. Then, if you still wish to go home, I will have him drive you anywhere you need to be. No conditions, no hidden costs, simply a meal and a chair." Every survival rule Lena had learned across 3 foster homes began to shriek in her mind. Men did not offer help without a price. They didn't break your fall only to offer a ride in a private car. They had an agenda. There was always an agenda. But the exhaustion, it was a lead weight on her soul, a weariness of the fear, the hunger, the hollow ritual of convincing herself that home was the safest place to be. Why? The word was a faint exhalation. The man's stoic expression shifted, a subtle softening around the edges. Because, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur, I recognize what it looks like when someone is out of choices, and I can't stand by and watch it happen when I have the power to help. Before Lena could form a reply, a glare of headlights filled the tunnel. The A train thundered into the station, its brakes groaning, its doors sighing open with a familiar tone. The platform crowd surged like a tide. Teenagers jostled past. A drunk man lurched for an open car. But the stranger remained still, his eyes on her, waiting. Lena's gaze went to the train, to the open doors that represented a path back to her apartment, back to Ethan, back to the same repeating nightmare. Then she looked back at the stranger. 20 minutes, she heard her own voice say. And then I need to go home. The lie felt like poison on her tongue. Home was the last place she wanted to be, but she couldn't find any other words. The stranger gave a single, sharp nod. 20 minutes. He motioned to the stairs and fell in step beside her as she shouldered her bag and began to walk. Behind them, the train doors chimed their final warning and slid shut. The A train pulled away, leaving Lena Carter walking into the unknown with a man whose name she had yet to learn. The stairs were a mountain. Each step was a battle between will and weakness, a conscious command to her trembling legs to keep climbing. The stranger stayed beside her, not touching, but close enough to be a silent promise that he would catch her if she fell. His presence was a tangible pressure, though his eyes were fixed ahead, granting her a fragile illusion of space. The November chill was a physical blow, far sharper than it had been before. Lena's jaw began to tremble uncontrollably. She fought to still it, but her body was no longer listening to commands. A black town car idled at the curb, its sleek lines broadcasting a wealth so profound Lena nearly turned back. A man in a tailored suit stood by the passenger door, perhaps 60 years old, with a face that seemed to have witnessed everything and been moved by nothing. Adrian, the driver said, his tone one of casual familiarity. Not sir, not Mr. Valente, just a name. So the stranger was Adrian. Marcus. There's been a change of plans. We need to make one stop before we head to the office. Marcus's gaze fell on Lena, a quick, efficient assessment, just like his employer's. He saw the scrubs, the fatigue, the damage she tried to hide. Yet, unlike Adrian, his expression remained a perfect neutral mask. He simply nodded and opened the door. Where to? Somewhere quiet. A 24-hour place with real food, not only coffee. I know somewhere. Adrian motioned for Lena to enter. She froze, every warning from her past screaming. But then the wind found its way through her thin coat, and her knees threatened to buckle, and the difference between a warm car and a cold sidewalk ceased to be a choice. The car's interior was an embrace of leather and something else. Expensive, perhaps, or just the quiet scent of a different world. The seats were warm. As Lena sank into the plush cushion, a sound that was nearly a sob of relief caught in her throat. When had she last felt such comfort? Adrian sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance. Marcus shut the door, and the engine came to life with a soundless purr, a world away from the rumble of the bus or Ethan's wrecked Honda Civic. As they slipped into the flow of traffic, Lena watched the familiar streets drift by. She knew she should be afraid. She should be mapping the route, planning an escape, bracing for what was to come. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was warm and she was sitting, and her exhausted body had declared that nothing else mattered. "How long have you been a nurse?" Adrian's voice cut through her reverie. Lena turned to face him. In the car's gentle light, she could see the fine lines etched around his eyes, the first touch of silver in his dark hair. He sat with the disciplined stillness, a man who had trained himself to eliminate every wasted motion. 4 years, she replied. Well, 3 years and 8 months to be exact. Do you enjoy it? Did she? Lena couldn't recall if there had ever been enjoyment, or if it had simply been the most logical path after the system released her with no support and a desperate need for a job with benefits. I am good at my job, she answered instead. It's not the same thing, I know, but it's something. Adrian nodded as if her answer was profound. And what would you be doing if you could do anything at all? The question stunned her. People didn't ask her such things. They asked about covering shifts, about the shadows under her eyes, about what new thing was broken. No one spoke of dreams to someone who operated purely on survival. I don't know, she confessed. Then, as the strange intimacy of the warm, dark car unspooled something inside her, she added, I used to want to teach, little kids maybe. I used to like children. She paused. Before what? Before the system taught her that caring was a vulnerability. Before Ethan taught her that desire was just a weapon for someone else to use. Before you learned it wasn't practical. Adrian finished for her, his voice devoid of judgment. Something like that. For several minutes they rode in silence. Lena watched the city's other life pass by. Bodegas, diners, figures huddled on corners, all waiting for something. New York, after midnight, was a different creature entirely. More raw, more desperate, and far more honest about its own brutal appetites. Marcus guided the car onto a quiet side street, stopping before a diner Lena had never seen. A neon sign in blue and white declared it Athena's. Inside, a handful of solitary figures were scattered in booths, the night shift, the sleepless, the lost souls who had no better place to go. 20 minutes, Adrian said, his voice echoing her own words from the platform. Food, warmth. Then I'll take you wherever you need to go. Lena just nodded, not trusting her voice, not trusting that if she spoke, the truth might spill out. The truth that sounded like, please don't make me go back, or I don't know how much longer I can do this, or simply, I am so incredibly tired of pretending. Marcus opened her door. The cold air rushed in but couldn't seem to touch her now. Adrian exited first, then turned and offered her his hand. For a long, silent moment, she just looked at it. His hands were a paradox. Pristine nails, but with calluses that spoke of labor his expensive suit was meant to conceal, and a thin white scar etched across his knuckles like a hard-won memory. She accepted his offer. His grasp was a warm, steady presence, offering just enough support to guide her without implying she was fragile. The second her footing was sure on the pavement, he released her. The diner's heat embraced them as they stepped inside. A waitress, her eyes weary, her hair streaked with gray, glanced up from her counter. She registered Adrian's fine coat and Lena's worn hospital uniform, then motioned to a secluded booth. Coffee? Was her simple question as they slid into the vinyl seats. Water, to start, Adrian answered before Lena could form a word. And then coffee, if she'd like, and 2 orders of your most substantial meal, not just breakfast items. The waitress, whose name tag read Deb, lifted a curious eyebrow but said nothing. Meatloaf is good. Comes with mashed potatoes, green beans. Adrian turned to Lena, who gave a slight, exhausted nod, too drained for decisions. 2 meatloaf dinners it is, Adrian confirmed. And please keep the water coming. When Deb was gone, Lena's eyes traced the patterns on the old clean table, a surface steeped in decades of spilled drinks and hushed confessions. Her hands rested flat against the laminate. She saw them then, beside Adriana's, as he set down his phone. Hers, chapped and sore from constant scrubbing, nails bitten down, a bandage wrapped around one finger from a misplaced IV needle just yesterday. His were immaculate, controlled, everything in its place. "You don't need to be doing this," she murmured. "Doing what?" "This whole rescue mission, I'm all right. You've graduated from I'm fine to a slightly more elaborate I'm fine. That's an improvement." A hint of gentle mockery laced his voice. In spite of it all, Lena felt the corner of her lip twitch in a near smile. The expression felt alien on her face, emotion she had long since forgotten. Deb came back with 2 tall glasses of ice water and a steaming coffee pot. Lena seized a glass, drinking nearly half its contents in one long, desperate pull. Her stomach protested, too much, too soon, but the relief that flooded her system as the cold liquid hit was all that mattered. She hadn't known how parched she truly was. "Easy," Adrian cautioned, his tone a gentle suggestion, not an order. "You'll make yourself ill." A medical opinion from a non-medical professional. "Common sense," he countered. From someone who has seen what happens when a person running on fumes tries to refill the tank all at once. Lena lowered the glass and finally met his gaze. "And how exactly have you seen that so often? Do you frequently collect half-conscious nurses from subway stations?" "No." Adrian settled back into the booth, and for the first time since he'd caught her, a measure of calm settled over him. "But I have found myself in situations that demanded I trust someone based on very little information. I have learned to assess people quickly." "And what is your assessment of me?" The words escaped with the sharpness she hadn't intended, a defensive barrier against anyone who dared to look too closely. Yet Adrian didn't recoil. "I see a person who has survived on scraps for so long," he said softly, "that the offer of a full meal feels like a trap. Someone who feels the need to apologize for their own existence. Someone who has forgotten that desire, that wanting things is not a personal failing." A knot formed in Lena's throat. She turned away, her gaze landing on the dark, empty street outside, anywhere but his penetrating gray eyes. "You know nothing about me." "No," Adrian conceded. "I do not. But I know what I witnessed on that platform. And I know that the bruises on your arms did not come from a simple fall." A heavy silence descended between them. Sharp and final, Lena could hear her own pulse pounding in her ears. This was the moment, the one where she should offer a flimsy excuse, a laugh, a story about her own clumsiness, any of the tired lies she kept ready. But the exhaustion of upholding those lies was a weight all its own. "It is not your concern," she said instead. "You're correct. It isn't." Deb reappeared, bearing 2 plates laden with real food. The scent of the meatloaf was a ghost of comfort in forgotten times. The potatoes were swimming in gravy, the green beans glistened with actual butter, not steamed into oblivion. The waitress set down the plates, silverware, and extra napkins, then departed as silently as she came. Lena stared at the meal. When had anyone last given her food without an unspoken price attached? When had she last eaten anything that wasn't snatched from a vending machine or a granola bar devoured between emergencies? "Eat," Adrian said, his voice gentle. He lifted his own fork, seemingly willing to let the topic of her injuries fade away. So she ate. The first taste of the creamy potatoes was so comforting it almost brought tears to her eyes. The second taste grounded her. By the third, she was consumed by a singular focus, her body finally convincing her mind that this kindness was real, that yes, she was permitted to have this. Adrian ate as well, but at a slower pace, observing her with a soft, peripheral awareness that felt far less intrusive than a direct stare. They passed several minutes without speaking, the quiet filled only by the scrape of forks on ceramic and the low hum of the diner around them. Lena managed half of her dinner before her stomach signaled it had reached its limit. She put her fork down, taking a more measured sip of water this time. "Better?" Adrian inquired. She was. The dark spots clouding her vision had vanished. The tremor in her hands had stilled. She felt warm, nourished, and for the first time in 16 hours, she wasn't on the verge of collapse. "Thank you." "You are welcome. I should probably—" Lena's eyes fell to her phone. 12:47 a.m. 13 new messages from Ethan, each one laced with more venom than the last. Her stomach twisted anew, a feeling that had nothing to do with the food. "I need to get home." Adrian's gaze followed hers to the phone, reading the sudden tension that seized her features. "Is home where you want to be right now?" he asked. "Want has nothing to do with it." "That is not an answer." Lena truly looked at him then, absorbing the deliberate stillness of his posture, the fine clothes that failed to soften him, the eyes that had surely witnessed violence and refused to look away. "Who are you?" she finally asked. "Truly, you are not just some man who happened to be in the right place at the right time." Adrian paused for a beat. "My name is Adrian Valente," he said. "I own a private security company. We manage high-threat situations for clients who cannot use conventional means of protection." "Security?" Lena tested the word. It was somehow both more and less than she had imagined. "Bodyguards, for one thing." "And you're telling me this because you asked, and because I do not deceive the people I intend to help." "You intend to help me?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you are in need of it, because I am able to, because—" He hesitated, something shifting deep within his gaze. "Because a long time ago, someone offered me help when I had no reason to accept it and every reason to turn it away. I have been repaying that debt ever since." Lena's phone vibrated again. She refused to look. She couldn't. To see it would be to see Ethan's name, and to see his name would be to remember the reality that was waiting for her, and to remember that would shatter the fragile sliver of courage now taking root in her heart. "If I don't return home," she began, her voice low, "he will only become more enraged. Tomorrow will be worse." "Will it?" Adrian's question was quiet but sharp. "Or will it simply be different?" "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means that perhaps things are already as terrible as they can be, and you remain only because you fear the unknown more. But from my vantage point, I fail to see how things could be worse than hidden bruises and collapsing on a subway platform because you are too terrified to eat in your own home." Lena opened her mouth to object, to tell him he was wrong, that he couldn't possibly grasp the complexities, that leaving was never as simple as just walking out the door. But the words died on her tongue because he was right. It was already that bad. It had been for months, and every day she stayed, every justification she crafted, every lie she told herself. It would get better. She deserved this. She just has to be quieter, smaller, was just a way of choosing a familiar hell over an unknown future. I have nowhere else I can go, she whispered, the admission costing her everything. Adrian took out his phone, typed a quick message, and waited. A reply came almost instantly. I maintain a discreet apartment in Tribeca for sensitive situations. It is currently unoccupied. It has a full kitchen, clean linens, and a security system that is nearly impenetrable. He looked up at her, his expression serious. You can stay there tonight. Tomorrow as well, if you need. We can explore your options. If you desire nothing more from me than a safe place to rest, that is also fine. But whatever you choose, you do not have to return to the place where you got those bruises. Not tonight. Lena's heart pounded. This was madness. She did not know this man. She had no way of knowing if his offer was salvation or merely a different kind of cage, dressed in a more expensive suit. But she knew with chilling certainty what waited for her if she boarded that train to Washington Heights. She knew Ethan would be there, drunk and seething, searching for someone to blame for his own miserable existence. She knew her lateness would be all the proof he needed. She understood the script of refusal, so a quiet surrender escaped her lips. Okay, Lena heard the words. Okay, just for tonight. A single nod from Adrian sealed it, a gesture carrying the weight of an accord and a solemn oath. He gestured for the bill, leaving a sum that felt like an insult to poverty. Then he rose. Lena followed, her own legs finding their strength, her sight sharpening as nourishment brought her back from the edge. Yet a faint tremor betrayed her as she collected her backpack. As Adrian held the door, she paused, needing a deep breath to cross the threshold into the unknown. The vehicle was waiting, Marcus a patient sentinel at the door, as if strange midnight detours were commonplace. In Adrian's world, perhaps they were. Tribeca apartment, Adrian stated as they settled inside. The secure one? Understood. The drive was 20 minutes, a descent through Manhattan's soul from working-class grit to the gleam of glass towers. Lena watched the world shift in total silence, her phone a dead weight in her pocket. She had silenced its buzzing alerts. Whatever rage Ethan was unleashing, she refused to hear it. Not now, perhaps never again. They arrived before a building that whispered of immense wealth, a discreet entrance, a doorman who acknowledged Adrian with a familiar nod, and a lobby torn from the pages of a luxury design magazine. Miss Carter is staying in 12B, Adrian informed the doorman. Please grant her full guest access and ensure all her needs are met. The doorman, James, hardly reacted. Of course, Mr. Valente. Welcome, Miss Carter. The elevator was a cage of glass and steel, moving with a precision that spoke of meticulous, silent care. It ascended noiselessly, digits climbing as Lena's stomach churned with an anxiety far removed from vertigo. 12th floor. The doors parted to a corridor so perfectly curated it felt hostile. Muted tones, authentic art, and lighting crafted to flatter, not merely to see by. Adrian guided her to the second door to the left and produced a key card. A soft beep, a solid click. The door revealed a space that reduced her Washington Heights studio to a cupboard. An open layout, a kitchen with vast counters and immaculate appliances. A living room furnished with costly pieces that were, against all odds, inviting. Immense windows framed a cityscape whose value per square foot dwarfed yearly incomes. Bedrooms are that way, Adrian indicated toward a hall. Ensuite bathrooms, fresh towels in the closet, essentials under the sink, and the kitchen is supplied. Please help yourself. I can arrange for clothing to be delivered tomorrow if you like. Lena stood frozen amidst the opulence, feeling like a feral thing brought indoors, trailing the grime and scars of a life on the edge. "This is excessive," she whispered. "It is a secure place to rest." "That is not excessive. That is the bare minimum. I have no way to pay for this. Payment was never requested." "Then what is it you want?" The question was a blade honed by suspicion. Kindness like this always had a price. Adrian studied her for a long, silent beat, then crossed to the island, retrieved a card, and inscribed something on its back. "My personal line, you can contact me 24 hours a day. For anything, food, clothing, help with the situation you're escaping, you call me." He paused. "What I want is for you to be safe. That is all. No debt, no ledger, just the chance to sleep without fear." As he moved to leave, a cold panic seized her. "Wait," she said. "What if?" The question died, unable to contain the scenarios flooding her mind. "What if he finds you?" Adrian finished for her. "He will not. This building's security is nearly impenetrable, but for your peace of mind, there is a panic button beside the bed that dials my phone and security directly. Press it, and someone arrives in under 2 minutes. You have done this before," she realized. "Helped people in these situations?" "Yes." "Why?" A shadow crossed Adrian's features, a flicker of old pain, of regret. "Because I know the feeling of having no choices, and I know what it means when someone shows you that you do." He departed before she could ask more, the door closing with a soft sound that felt absolute. Lena stood alone in the quiet apartment, trying to piece together the last hour. A collapse on a cold platform, the arms of a stranger with storm-gray eyes, warmth, and an offer of sanctuary that felt like a fragile dream. Her phone buzzed one last time. 22 messages. She pulled it out, saw Ethan's name on the screen, and felt a fundamental shift within her. She powered it down. Not for a little while, not just for the night. She held the button until the screen went dark, until his digital voice was silenced, until the invisible chain he held on her finally fell away, broken. She walked to the windows then, gazing at Manhattan unfurled below like a promise she couldn't yet believe. Out there, Ethan was probably destroying their apartment, lost in a rage, planning what he would do upon her return. But she was not going home. Not tonight. And maybe not ever. Lena pressed her forehead to the cool glass and wept for the first time in 8 months. These were not silent tears, but racking sobs that shook her frame, purging the terror, the weariness, and desperate hope that this might be real. That being saved from a fall was more than a fairy tale. That sometimes strangers with eyes the color of a storm meant every single word they said. Lena woke in unfamiliar light, not the weak gray that bled through her single north-facing window, choked by the building opposite. This was genuine sunlight, golden and warm, pouring through the vast windows as if the city were offering a rare gift. For 3 disoriented seconds, she was lost. Then memory returned in a sudden flood. The platform, Adriana's hands catching her, the diner, the choice she made in the pre-dawn hours to not go back. Her phone sat on the nightstand, dark and inert. She stared at it as if it were a live explosive. In the daylight, the bedroom was immaculate, with white linens that cost more than her weekly wage. The furniture was from the sort of store that omits price tags because asking the price meant you could never afford it. Through the open door, the living room was unchanged, but the morning sun had transformed its elegance into something almost accusatory. What in God's name had she done? Lena sat up, taking inventory of her body's silent complaints. The profound exhaustion had eased, but the rest remained. Bruises on her ribs protested each breath, the tender spot on her cheek where Ethan's ring had made its mark. Muscles aching from 16-hour shifts and the tension of living in fear. The clock read 9:47 a.m. She had slept for almost 9 hours. When had that last occurred? Her backpack sat on a chair where she'd left it. Inside, her scrubs smelled of the hospital and sweat. 3 granola bars, a paperback book, a wallet with a drained account, and an ID for a home she could never return to. Her entire world contained within one bag. The thought should have been crushing. Instead, it was strangely liberating. There were no anchors holding her down, nothing she couldn't leave behind. But she had already left, hadn't she? The moment she chose Adriana's car over the train, she'd made an irreversible choice. Her stomach growled, breaking her mental spiral. Right. Food. Adrienne said the kitchen was supplied. She padded out in an oversized t-shirt from the closet, his, she assumed, smelling faintly of his expensive cologne, and opened the refrigerator. Supplied was a profound understatement. Fresh produce, real eggs, butter, milk that was not expired, cheese in solid blocks. The freezer offered quality meats, frozen fruit, and ice cream in cartons with minimalist designs. Lena stared at the bounty and felt something fracture inside her chest. When had she last opened a fridge and seen choices? When had breakfast not been a desperate calculation of what she could afford? She made scrambled of eggs with cheese, toast with actual butter, and drank orange juice that tasted like fresh oranges. Sitting at the island in borrowed clothes in a stranger's apartment, eating food she hadn't bought, she fought the overwhelming feeling of being an imposter. The business card Adrienne left sat where he had placed it. Heavy, white stock, Valente Security Solutions in discreet black letters, a number. And on the back, in a surprisingly neat hand, was his direct line, as promised. Lena picked it up, turning it over in her hands. She knew she should call to thank him for last night, for this. Her next move was avoid. Her only plan was never returning to Ethan, a desperate hope, not a strategy. Before doubt could reclaim her, she powered on the phone. Its screen flared to life, unleashing a digital flood. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. The numbers just kept climbing. 37 texts, 15 missed calls, 8 voicemails, all bearing his name. Lena's hands trembled as she opened the messages. A voice screamed not to look, but a self-destructive curiosity needed to see the cage she had fled. The first messages feigned normalcy. Where are you? Your shift ended at 11:30. Answer me. Then the poison began to seep through. Accusations of betrayal, commands for her immediate return. He warned of what would happen when she did. By 2 a.m., his approach shifted to hollow apologies. He was sorry. He didn't mean it. It was only worry, a side of him she knew too well. By 4 a.m., the threats were back, darker than before. He knew she was with someone else. She would pay. Did she really think she could just vanish? The last message at 7:23 this morning was a chilling vow. I know you'll come back. You always do. Because you got nowhere else to go. Lena set the phone down, leaving the voicemails unheard. Her appetite vanished. The food in her stomach felt like stone. He was right, wasn't he? There was nowhere else. This apartment was a temporary mercy. Adrienne's help was a fleeting kindness. Soon, reality would demand its due. No savings, no family, and a list of friends she had methodically alienated to soothe Ethan's jealousy. Her phone rang, but it was not him. An unrecognized number. She nearly declined, but an impulse made her answer. Miss Carter? The voice was male, professional, a complete stranger. Yes, this is James from the front desk. My apologies for the intrusion, but a gentleman named Ethan Morris is here asking for you. He is quite certain you are staying in this building. Lena's blood ran cold. What? He has no clearance, of course, and I've stated I cannot confirm guest information, but he refuses to leave. I wanted to alert you before contacting the police. How? Lena's voice was a strangled whisper. How did he find me? I cannot say, ma'am. Would you like me to have him removed? Yes, please. Her mind raced. Don't tell him anything. Deny that I'm here. Tell him he's mistaken. Understood. I will handle it with discretion. The line went silent. Lena sat frozen at the kitchen island, a knot of panic tightening in her throat. How had he found her? She told no one. She hadn't even known her own destination. Had he tailed her, watched the station, somehow tracked her device? The phone, of course. The Life 360 app he'd made her install 6 months ago, claiming it was for her safety. She had forgotten it, blocked out the digital leash he kept on her every move. With trembling hands, Lena found the app and erased it. She then swept through her phone, revoking permissions, deleting anything that could broadcast her location. This should have been her first act, a thought that should have come to her last night. But she was so weary, so desperate for a single night of peace that she failed to cover her electronic trail. A knock on the door made her flinch, nearly sending her off the stool. Miss Carter, it is James from downstairs. I have something for you. Lena crept to the door as if it were dangerous, checking the peephole. It was the doorman from before, alone, holding a small box. She opened the door partway, the security chain still in place. I apologize for disturbing you again, James said. His face was professionally blank, but his eyes were kind. Mr. Morris has been escorted from the property. Security now has his photo. He will not be permitted back. Mr. Valente also called. He is on his way. He called you? The distress alert in this unit is linked to several contacts. When I informed Mr. Valente of the situation, he said he would handle it personally. James held out the package. He also asked me to bring this up, said you might be in need of it. Lena took the box, which was surprisingly heavy, and mumbled her thanks. James simply nodded and left. She shut the door, secured all 3 locks, and leaned back against it. The box held a new phone, a top-tier model still in its shrink wrap. A note in Adrian's script lay on top. Untraceable. New number. Your old phone is compromised. How had he known? How had he acted so quickly? Another knock came. Lena checked the peephole again to see Adrian, dressed more casually than before. He wore dark jeans, a black sweater, and a leather jacket that was likely worth more than her car. Still wealthy, but less overtly so. She opened the door. Adrian's eyes went to her face, assessing her condition. Are you okay? How did you know about Ethan and the phone? James called me when a man arrived asking for you. Given what happened last night, I took an educated guess. He came inside, and Lena saw he moved like a man accustomed to evaluating a room for threats. May I? She nodded, still holding the new phone. Adrian strode to the windows and gazed at the street below. He's gone. Security walked him 2 blocks and made it clear a return means an arrest for trespassing. We also reported the harassment to the NYPD. You can't. That will only make him angrier. You don't know what he's like. You're right, I don't, Adrian replied, turning to her. But I know his type. I know men like him thrive on their victims' belief that they are powerless. The moment you stop believing that, everything changes. You don't understand. He will find me. He always does. Not here. Adrienne's voice was flat, absolute. This building has security features few know about. Facial recognition tied to a blacklist, biometric access, 24-hour monitoring. He is physically unable to get to you here. Lena wanted so badly to believe him. She wanted to trust that steel and cameras could keep her safe, but 8 months with Ethan taught her that walls were only suggestions to a man like him. That locks meant nothing to his determination. He knows I am here, she whispered. He tracked my phone. He will wait. He will watch. He'll find out when I have to leave. Then do not leave. Not right away. Adrienne walked to the kitchen and began making coffee as if it were his own apartment. Or maybe it wasn't hers. She didn't know what this place was. Take a few days. Let me deal with this. Deal with it how? Through legal channels, a restraining order documenting the harassment. I retain lawyers who specialize in these matters. They are the best at what they do. I can't afford a lawyer. Adrienne poured 2 cups of coffee, adding cream to both without asking, somehow knowing her preference. I am not asking you to pay. You can't just... Lena fumbled for words. Why are you doing all this? You don't know me. I'm no one. You're someone who needed help. Adrienne passed her a mug. That is enough. They stood in the quiet kitchen, drinking coffee as Manhattan stirred 12 floors below them. Lena's mind was a storm of possibilities, of consequences, of every way this could end in disaster. Adrienne seemed at peace with the silence, not pushing, just present. Finally, she asked the question that had been haunting her. What happened to you? You said someone helped you before. What did you mean by that? Adrienne was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When I was 17, I was involved with people whose earnings never saw a tax return. I thought I was smart, that I was tough, that the world was simply divided between the strong and the weak. He stared down into his coffee. Then I made a mistake that should have cost me my life. Someone stepped in, got me out. They gave me a choice about the kind of man I wanted to be. What did you choose? To be the person who steps in. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers. I built my entire company on that one principle. We protect people who cannot find safety through conventional methods. Sometimes it is an executive with a stalker. Other times a witness who needs to disappear. He gestured around the apartment. And sometimes it's a nurse who collapses in the subway because she is too terrified to go home. I am not your responsibility. No, Adrienne agreed. You are your own. I am just offering resources. Her old phone buzzed in the counter, another text from Ethan. She did not look. I have to work, she said. My shift starts at 3. Call in sick. I can't afford to. Yes, you can. You can afford one day to plan your next move without worrying he'll be waiting for you outside the hospital. He was right. Lena knew he was right. But a sick day meant lost wages, and she was already behind on bills, drowning in debt, and one emergency away from financial ruin. Adrienne seemed to read her thoughts. How much do you clear in one shift? That isn't... Humor me. After taxes, about $200. And why? Adrienne took out his wallet and counted out bills. $400. He placed the cash on the counter. That's 2 shifts. Take today and tomorrow. Let your body rest. Let me handle the legal side. On Monday, you can go to work with a restraining order in place and security measures set up. Lena stared at the money. I can't take that. You already have. It's on the counter. This is not. People don't just give money away. I am not people. I am someone who can give you $400 without noticing it is gone. And you are someone who needs it so badly that pride should not be what stops you from accepting it. The brutal honesty of his words cut through her protests. He saw the truth of it. She was desperate for this, for the space, the aid, the chance to set down a burden she'd held alone for too long. What if I just run with your money? She heard herself ask. A smile touched Adriana's lips, and for a moment his severe features softened into something approaching warmth. It's not in your nature, he said. And if it were, I'd call it $400 well spent on someone's freedom. Lena's fingers brushed the bills, folding them with precision before placing them back on the table. How could she do this? How could she take the help, trust the kindness, believe it came without a price? That's all right. Adrian drank the last of his coffee and rinsed the cup. You don't need to understand it. Just allow it. He departed soon after, assuring her of legal updates. Alone, Lena tried to make sense of the past 12 hours. Only yesterday she was a prisoner in a life she despised with no hope of escape. And now, here she was, in a Tribeca high-rise, sipping rich coffee, with $400 on the counter and the vow of a stranger's shield. It was surreal, a phantom moment that might vanish if she blinked. Yet the coffee was hot, the money was solid, and the ache in her ribs was undeniable. And somewhere out there, Ethan's fury was likely tearing their old life apart, a storm seeking a target. But not here, never here. After 8 long months, she was finally behind a fortress he could not breach. She unboxed the new phone, beginning the setup. A new number, a fresh start, a chance at a life free from the constant calculus of his rage, where every word and breath wasn't a potential trigger. The screen requested a passcode. She paused, then typed 6 numbers. November 27th, the date she chose to leap forward into the unknown. A buzz from her old phone, his name on the screen, a choice was made. Sliding the window open, she looked down 12 floors to the street below and let the old device go. It tumbled end over end before meeting the pavement in a burst of fractured pieces. She slid the window shut, a faint smile on her lips. 3 days drifted by in a haze of unreality. Adrian's updates were constant, the order filed, the threats recorded. The police had warned Ethan off, and Lena learned the apartment's quiet pulse, reteaching her body how to rest without fear. The 4th day came, and with it a return to work. Marcus drove, a provision from Adrian that was not up for debate. The car stopped at the hospital's staff entrance at 2:45 p.m. Lena felt like an actress stepping into her own life. "I'll be waiting when you finish," Marcus stated. "That's not necessary, sir." My instructions were explicit. She let the argument die. It was becoming clear that Adrian didn't offer suggestions. He executed plans with an efficiency that made protest seem futile. The emergency room was its usual symphony of chaos. 3 stabbings, 2 overdoses, a man with a ruined hand, and the distant screams of a woman in Bay 6. Just another Tuesday in the city? Carter. Linda, her supervisor, materialized beside her. "You're back. All good?" "Yes, thanks for the cover. A little more than 2 hours warning next time would be nice." Linda's words were pointed, but held no malice. "We're stretched thin without last-minute call-outs." "I understand." "My apologies. It won't be an issue again." An apology was simpler than the truth. The escape, the safe house, the legal battle. Better to be seen as the unreliable nurse than the woman who had finally broken free. Her shift became a familiar, chaotic blur, a rhythm of drips, beeps, and notes, and the unique exhaustion born from tending to human suffering. 5 hours in, while charting, she felt a stare, a cold prickle on her skin. She raised her head, and there, in the waiting area, was Ethan. The air left her lungs. He couldn't be here. He simply could not be here. The court order forbade this, yet he stood 40 feet away, his gaze piercing the glass, a look that vowed retribution. A tremor ran through Lena's hands and the pen fell. Jennifer, a younger colleague, noticed her fixed stare. "Friend of yours? He's been lurking for about an hour. Security almost tossed him, but he claimed to be meeting someone." "Get them," Lena whispered. "Now." Jennifer's expression shifted to alarm. "Oh, damn! Is he—" She reached for the phone, but Lena was frozen, pinned by his gaze, trapped like a rabbit in the hunter's sights. She watched his face twist from ownership to malice as he understood she'd made the call. He moved toward the entrance, but security was vaster. 2 guards larger than him blocked his path. The words were lost to her, but the choreography was clear, his posture changing from aggression to wounded defense. His phone came out, a weapon of its own, recording their encounter. She watched them guide him firmly away. He glanced back one last time, his eyes locking with hers, his mouth forming a silent promise. This isn't over. Then he was gone. She remained motionless until Linda was at her side. "Are you all right?" "That man. I have a protective order against him." "I see." Linda's face became stone. "My office, now." The room was a cramped space, buried in paper and smelling of stale coffee and anxiety. Linda produced a document. "This is procedure. We flag individuals with protective orders. Security gets his picture. If he returns, the police are called instantly." She pushed the form toward her. "Fill this in. And Lena, I have to be sure you're safe. If this gets worse, it's a liability for all of us." "I am safe," Lena insisted, her trembling hands betraying her. "I have a secure place. It's under control." "Is it, though?" Linda's doubt was palpable. "Because from my perspective, this is only the beginning." And she knew Linda was right. The rest of her shift was a blur of adrenaline and dread. Every noise made her flinch, every face a potential mask for his. At 11:30, Marcus arrived, and she sank into the car's leather seat, a marionette whose strings had been severed. "Trouble?" he asked, his eyes on her in the mirror. "He found me at the hospital." Marcus immediately took out his phone and typed a message. 30 seconds passed, and her own phone vibrated. A text from Adrian. "Get her home. I am dealing with this now. Woos." What did that mean? The question formed, then dissolved in her exhaustion. She drifted off, waking only when they arrived. In the apartment, Adrian was waiting. He glanced up from his laptop as she came in, his gaze assessing her expression before he shut the machine. "Walk me through it." And so she did. Every detail spilled out. The stare, the guards, the paperwork, and the suffocating certainty that Ethan was out there, plotting. When her story was done, he sat in silence for a moment. "This will be over by tomorrow." "You can't know that." "Observe." He lifted his phone and made a call. "Leo, I need a full workup on an Ethan Morris. All of it. Criminal, financial, professional, personal. Every fine, every debt. I need it by sunrise. I'm aware of the hour. Charge the account." He ended the call, his eyes finding hers again. Men like him operate in the shadows. They count on their victims' fear to keep them safe. But fear is only a weapon when you have no other choice. What's your plan? To provide you with choices. He reopened the laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. By morning, we will have his entire life on this screen. And then we will demonstrate that harassing you carries a cost he is unable to pay. A part of her knew she ought to be unsettled by his detached resolve, by this weaponization of information. This was a dark game, one she had been forced to learn from a master. But the only thing she felt was a profound sense of relief. An ally, someone with power, with reach, and with the silent intensity of a man who had his own history with darkness. I need to compensate you, she began, for the flat, the legal help. No, Adrian said, his gaze fixed on his screen. No. He finally looked up. I meant it. No cost, no strings. This is part of the work. That doesn't explain why. He shut the laptop and leaned back. The truth. My client list is filled with the wealthy and the famous. But this firm was founded on the memory of being 17 and having no power at all. And so, once each month, I take on a client who cannot afford my services. You are that client this month. So I'm just a case file. You are a person who has a right to feel secure. The file is a formality. The work is just basic human decency. Lena finally sat opposite him. And if I still want to repay you when I'm able, then give it to a shelter for women. Or you can help the next soul who finds themselves where you are. Pass the kindness on, never back. The words echoed from the diner, a mantra that seemed to fuel his every action. Lena searched his features, trying to grasp the force that compels a man to live this way. Forever aiding, forever stepping in, a constant shield between the innocent and the darkness that hungers for them. Who did that for you? She asked. When you were 17, who stepped in? A complex shadow fell across Adrian's face. Her name was Marie. She ran a center in the Bronx. I stumbled in one night, bleeding, and she never asked why, just patched me up, fed me, and told me I was worth more than a life leading to an early grave. He paused. She passed 6 years back. Cancer. I never had the chance to truly thank her. So that's the reason? It's one of them. Adrian rose, moving to the glass. The rest is selfish. Aiding others gives me a reason. It makes the hell I endured as a kid feel like it meant something. Lena moved to stand beside him at the window. Far below, the city pulsed with a million private wars of love and conflict, survival and collapse. How many more were out there, she thought, standing in borrowed rooms, taking aid from unknown hands, desperately hoping that safety was more than a dream. Thank you, she whispered. You don't need to do this. I have to, she insisted. You rescued me. Maybe not from death itself, but from a life that was ending. Her eyes met his. So, thank you. Adrian simply nodded. A current flowed between them, of understanding, of acknowledgement. Two survivors who knew that living meant accepting grace you never asked for. Get some sleep, he urged. Tomorrow will be difficult. He departed, leaving Lena once more to the silence of the borrowed space, a fortress of fine furnishings and the fragile hope of security. She showered, slipped into the clothes Adrian provided, simple, elegant, fitting her like a second skin she hadn't known in years, and found her way to bed. Rest found her with surprising ease, and for the first night in 8 months, her mind was free from nightmares of bolted doors, of waiting fists, of the chilling tone in Ethan's voice just before a lesson was delivered. Instead, she dreamt of a subway station and a hand reaching out to catch her mid-fall. The ascent to the courthouse felt like a march to her own hanging, Lena's heels echoed on marble floors that bore witness to 1,000 judgments, 1,000 lives shattered and pieced back together beneath sterile lights. She felt the burden of a justice system that was both a savior and a failure. It had been 3 months since the restraining order was filed by Adrian's counsel. 3 months since the DA moved forward. Armed with medical reports, Lena had finally summoned the courage to retrieve. 90 days of hearings, paperwork, and illegal jargon that was like drowning while trying to learn how to breathe. A safety that always felt borrowed. "We don't have to do this today," Adrian said at her side. He had cleared his schedule, postponed his world, and appeared at the Tribeca apartment. At 7 a.m., with coffee and a quiet strength that had become essential as air. "We can ask for a delay. Buy you more time." Lena smoothed the lapels of the blazer he'd provided, tailored just last week. A somber navy blue, the armor of a woman worthy of belief. In the restroom mirror, she saw the face of a stranger, hair tied back neatly, a light touch of makeup on skin that was finally healing, a stance that no longer bowed to the world. "Waiting will only make it harder," she replied. "It would just be more time for my own fear to win." "That's exactly my concern." Her gaze found his. The morning sun carved his face into sharp lines of disciplined worry. He had been so careful with her, never pressing, always allowing her the space she required, waiting for her to bridge the gap. The apartment had slowly become her sanctuary. Her clothes in the closet, her books on the shelves, her life slowly filling a space that was once just an empty echo. The future remained a silent, unanswered question. There was no talk of what came next, of where she would go, of what they would become when this storm finally passed. Certain discussions demand a steady footing, and Lena was still testing the ground beneath her, terrified it might give way. "I need this," she stated. "Not for the lawyers, not for the case. For me, I have to see him and feel nothing." Adrian nodded slowly. He knew the need to confront one's demons. He carried his own wounds, a violent past hinted at in hushed, sleepless nights. A quiet bond had grown between them. She and the man who had stopped her fall. 2 souls bearing scars, each learning how to lay down their burdens before they became their entire identity. The courtroom was disappointingly mundane, a lie perpetuated by film. No grand decor, only worn carpet, humming lights, and cheap benches that belonged in a school assembly. Ethan sat at the defendant's table. He was beside his public defender, a young woman with the bone-deep weariness of the overworked and underpaid. He was thinner now from his time in jail. His hair was shorn close, the garish orange of his uniform stark against his pale, sun-starved skin. As Lena entered, his head shot up, their gazes locking across 20 feet of charged air. She held his stare, refusing to break. It was the first battle won, a trembling reclamation of the strength he had bled from her over 8 long months. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Reeves, gestured for Lena to take a seat in the front. Adrian took his place at her side, a silent anchor close enough for her to feel his support, a promise that she would not face this alone, a guarantee that if she stumbled, he was there. The judge appeared, the room rose, the great impersonal gears of the law began to turn, and Lena fought to control her breath, to still the tremor in her hands. The prosecution calls Lena Marie Carter. Rising to her feet was an act of defiance. The walk to the witness stand was a lifetime of nightmares packed into 20 seconds. The cold floor, the sea of eyes, and Ethan's gaze, a silent threat of a punishment he could no longer deliver. The bailiff administered the oath. Lena placed a hand on a book that held no meaning for her and swore to speak the truth, the whole truth, as if truth were ever so simple, as if it could be scrubbed clean of the terror, the humiliation, and the tangled knots that bind a person to their own slow destruction. Patricia Reeves came forward, holding props she did not need. Lena saw it for what it was now, a stage play, meant to persuade 12 strangers that her suffering was real enough to warrant a price. Miss Carter, please describe for the court how you first met the defendant. Lena's throat was desert dry. She grasped for the water, buying 5 precious seconds to recall the calming breaths she had been taught. It was a bar in Queens 2 years ago. I was out with friends from work. He offered me a drink. And a relationship followed? Yes. We were together for roughly 14 months, and then I moved in. When did the violence begin? Lena had braced for the question, had recited the answer with Patricia until the words were worn smooth. But here, in this box with Ethan 10 feet from her and a room of jurors deciding if her agony was credible, the answer felt thin. It started about 3 months after I moved in. Little things. His temper when I was late from my job. Accusations. He'd go through my phone, my messages, his questions feeling more like an interrogation. She took a breath. Then one evening, I corrected a story he was telling his friends. After they were gone, he struck me for the first time. Please detail that event for us. This was the moment she feared, the cold, sterile retelling of brutality for an audience that could never comprehend the terror, the constant vigilance, or the poisoned way love can coexist with fear. In the stomach. He told me I had humiliated him, that I had to learn to be quiet. Her voice was monotone, stripped of feeling. She had rehearsed this detachment, the calm that makes a victim credible, not shrill. After that, it became frequent. For being late, for a meal not prepared, for a misplaced glance, for forgetting his beer, for simply being there when his rage needed a target. Did you seek help? A question that hung in the air. Lena recounted the 2 trips to the ER, the familiar lies about falling, about walking into a door. Her eyes met Patricia's, a silent acknowledgement of the irony. I'm a nurse, she explained. I see it constantly. But knowing the map and navigating the storm when your life is at stake are 2 entirely different worlds. Patricia gave a slow nod. Let's speak of the night of August 17th. The date was a shard of glass in her memory. The night everything shattered. Lena drank some water, allowing the memories she'd suppressed for 3 months to surface. A double shift, 16 brutal hours. She was bone-weary, starved, and bracing for Ethan's fury over her being late, knowing she couldn't refuse the overtime. Her eyes drifted to the jury. 7 women and 5 men, their expressions a mix of compassion and doubt. She told them of stopping at the corner store, hoping his favorite beer might act as a peace offering. But peace was not on offer. He was already lost to drink, his mind twisted with accusations that she'd been with someone at the hospital. When she tried to explain, his hands found her throat, slamming her against the wall with brutal force. Someone in the gallery gasped, a sharp intake of breath. Lena kept her gaze forward, clinging to the fragile calm she had so carefully built. He held her there until darkness crept in at the edge of her vision. Then he let her drop. As she lay on the floor, he kicked her twice in the ribs, his voice a low promise that if she ever showed such disrespect again, he would end her. Her own voice remained steady, clinical, like a nurse detailing a patient's chart. I believed him. What followed was a quiet retreat. She waited for him to pass out, packed a single bag, and fled to the cold refuge of an early shift. Another 16-hour day followed, and then another. She began a life of avoidance, slipping back home only to grab clothes when she knew he was gone. She slept in the hospital break room, in her car, on the rare nights she had gas money, sometimes just riding the subway back and forth where the motion felt safer than the stillness of their apartment. "Why didn't you leave?" It was the question everyone always asked. It was a question that presumed leaving was merely a choice, a simple act of walking away. "Because I had nowhere to go," she said. The apartment was in his name. Her world had been built inside his. She had no family, no savings to speak of. Every cent she earned was a sacrifice to the fragile peace, an offering to keep his temper from erupting. A crack appeared in Lena's steady voice. "And because he promised he would find me if I left, that he would hurt me in ways I couldn't imagine." She believed that promise, too. Patricia allowed the weight of her words to settle, letting the jury understand what it truly meant to be trapped. "Miss Carter, did a moment arrive when you could finally escape?" "Yes, the night I collapsed on the subway platform." Lena recounted the 16-hour shift, the hunger and the consuming fear of returning home. She spoke of falling, of being caught by a stranger who saw the truth behind her every well-rehearsed lie. He gave her food, warmth, and the first night of safe sleep she'd known in months. She never once looked at Adrian as she spoke, but she could feel his unwavering gaze on her, a tangible presence. "And after that evening, did the defendant try to reach you?" "Yes," she confirmed. The calls and texts were constant. He appeared at her job, intimidating her colleagues when they protected her. When he learned of the restraining order, he sent threats through friends, vowing to make her pay for the public shame. Patricia presented a phone. "Is this your mobile phone, Miss Carter?" "It is." "And do these messages belong to the defendant?" Lena glanced at the screen Patricia angled toward her. Ethan's words, now just black and white text, were stripped of the terror they'd carried when they arrived at 2 a.m., at 5 a.m., at all hours. "Yes." "Would you read message 14 to the court?" Lena's throat tightened. She knew the one Patricia had chosen, the one that had solidified the resolve of the DA's office. "You worthless whore, you think you can just leave, hide behind some rich boy and a piece of paper? I will find you. I will hurt you worse than you can imagine. And when I'm done, everyone will know what a lying tramp you are." The words landed with a thud in the silent courtroom. Lena saw the jury stir, the judge's face harden. Even Ethan's own lawyer seemed to flinch. "Thank you, Miss Carter. No more questions." The defense lawyer rose. She appeared fresh from law school, burdened by a case she couldn't win but was bound to defend. Lena almost pitied her. "Miss Carter, you've stated you're a nurse. Is that right?" "Yes." "And in that role, you are trained to identify the markers of domestic abuse?" "Yes." "So you were aware of how to get help. You knew of the resources. You were aware you could contact the police." It was a statement, not a question, but Lena answered. Knowing resources are there and being able to reach them when you fear for your life are different. "But you did, in the end, accept help from Mr. Valente." The lawyer shot a look at Adrian. "A man of wealth who gave you a home, legal aid, and financial backing. Is it not true you saw a chance to better your circumstances and seized it?" Patricia was on her feet instantly. "Objection. Counsel is suggesting the victim is at fault for being rescued." "Sustained. Continue, counselor." The attorney changed her approach. "Miss Carter, you remained with my client for 8 months after this supposed abuse began. You had chances to go. You decided to stay. Is it not conceivable that these events you recall were mutual altercations, arguments that became physical on both sides? Lena's hands tightened in her lap. This was the story she knew they would spin. The notion that she was a willing participant, that his violence was a two-way street between lovers. No, she said, her voice clear. I never struck him. I never threatened him. I never gave him a reason to fear coming home. What took place was not mutual. It was him inflicting pain on me, simply because he had the power to do so. But you have no witnesses to these events, no police reports from that time. It's only your word against my clients. I have the medical records from 2 emergency room visits. I have photos of the bruises. I have the text messages where he explicitly threatened my life. And I have... Lena paused, taking a breath. I have the fact that I'm sitting here in public, attaching my name and my face to this story, knowing it will follow me forever. No one does that for gain or attention. They do it because it happened, and they can no longer bear to pretend it did not. The defense attorney seemed to search for grounds to object, but found none. She sat. The judge declared a recess. Lena descended from the witness stand, her legs feeling like they might give way. Adrian met her at the railing, and this time she took his hand, letting herself lean on his solid presence before she had to steel herself for what was next. You were astonishing, he said softly. I think I might be sick. That's to be expected. Come, let's get some air. They found a secluded bench away from the courthouse bustle, where justice was being negotiated in hushed tones. Lena put her head between her knees, breathing against the nausea born not of sickness, but of excavating her deepest traumas for public view. Adrian didn't offer empty platitudes. He just sat with her, a hand on her back, a steady pressure that simply said, I am here. Do you think they believed me? Lena eventually asked. I think you spoke your truth, he replied. That is all anyone can do. It feels insufficient. It often does, but it is more than he ever gave you. Lena slowly sat up. Further down the hall, she saw Ethan being escorted back to the courtroom, cuffed, his face set in the familiar angry mask that once filled her with dread. Now, it just made her feel exhausted. What happens if they acquit him? She wondered aloud. Then we ensure you remain safe no matter what. The restraining order holds. The security detail remains. You will not face him by yourself. And if he is convicted, then he serves his time, and you begin to decide what your life will look like, free from him. That second possibility felt like a fairy tale, a story where justice prevails and survivors are not questioned for their own suffering. But 3 months prior, safety had also felt like a fairy tale. So had eating without fear and sleeping without being jolted awake by every noise. All those impossible things had slowly become her routine, built one careful day after another. They were called back inside. The closing arguments became a haze. There was Patricia's fervent recap of the evidence, countered by the defense's weak attempt to sow doubt where there was none. The jury departed to deliberate. The judge said court would resume upon a verdict. The wait was 4 hours long. Lena passed them in a small room with Patricia, Adrian, and 2 of his security team. Sandwiches were delivered that no one touched, and coffee grew cold in foam cups. Lena made an effort to read, to scroll on her phone, any activity to stop her mind from picturing Ethan walking free, appearing at the hospital, at her apartment, showing up in her life again with the same rage as before, only now sharpened by months of simmering resentment. With the bailiff's knock, a sound that signaled the jury's return, Lena's heart surged into her throat. The courtroom seemed to have shed its remaining warmth. Or perhaps it was her own body, which had forgotten the simple art of staying warm under duress. She claimed her front row seat and observed as 12 people filed back in, their expressions meticulously blank, betraying nothing. The foreman rose, a man of middle age, wearing glasses, with a face that could belong to a tax accountant or an insurance agent. In his hand, he clutched a paper that held Lena's future, neatly folded into a single devastating word. On the charge of second-degree assault, how do you find? Guilty! The air vanished from Lena's lungs. On the charge of aggravated harassment, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of stalking, how do you find? Guilty. 3 pronouncements of guilt, 3 declarations from the jury that her ordeal was real, that it had weight, that Ethan's cruelty was not defensible, not a shared failing, not a nightmare she had somehow conjured herself. From behind her came the sound of quiet weeping. Beside her, Adrian's hand found its way to hers, squeezing once. It was solid, warm, a tether to the present. Lena's eyes found Ethan. He stared forward, his face a mask of indifference, but she saw the frantic pulse in his jaw. It was the same telltale sign that had always warned her a storm was about to break. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks from then. A bailiff led Ethan away. His defense attorney collected her papers with the tired air of one who had seen this conclusion from the start. Patricia faced Lena and said, "You did it. This is how justice feels." Justice felt like a profound exhaustion, a wave of relief, and a strange, hollow space where the fear had taken root. Lena could only nod, words feeling far too immense to form. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun felt like a benediction on her face. It was spring in New York, a day when the city chose to be beautiful instead of merely brutal. Adrian had arranged for Marcus to bring the car, but Lena paused before they reached the curb. "Could we just walk?" she asked. He searched her face for a moment. "Are you sure? I have to move. I need to feel my own feet deciding my direction instead of being pulled along by court dates and decisions." "All right, where to?" Lena gazed down the bustling street at the city unfolding before her in all its wild promise. 3 months earlier, her life had been reduced to a backpack and pure terror. Now she had an apartment that was beginning to feel like a home. A job she'd reclaimed once the fear of Ethan appearing in the ER had subsided, and a man who had caught her fall and asked for nothing in return but the privilege of helping her stand. "Nowhere specific," she answered, "just away from this place." And so they began to walk. Adrienne fell into step beside her, letting her dictate the pace and the path without a word. They passed vendors selling halal food and bright bouquets of flowers. They moved through crowds of office workers taking late lunches and tourists poring over maps with a look of permanent bewilderment. Just ordinary people living their ordinary lives, completely unaware that a few blocks away, a woman's entire universe had just been fundamentally altered. "I'm still waiting for it to feel different," Lena finally confessed into the city air. "What's it?" "Winning, justice, whatever this is. I imagined that after the verdict I would feel, I don't know, liberated, triumphant, something more than this peculiar numbness." Adrian was silent for a few strides. "Justice doesn't undo what was done. It just places a final mark at the end of a chapter, so you're free to begin the next one." That's remarkably profound for a man who operates a security firm. I am a man of many layers. Against all odds, Lena felt a real smile form, a flicker of genuine amusement, not a performance. That was happening more often these days. Small moments where she forgot to be afraid or mournful and simply was. Their wandering led them to Battery Park, where they watched the restless water, the endless stream of tourists, and the ferries tracing their familiar paths to Staten Island. Lena found a bench marked with an engraved name she didn't know and tried to envision what lay ahead. Returning to an apartment that was meant to be a sanctuary but was slowly becoming a home. Going back to her job without that constant, fearful glance over her shoulder. She thought of constructing a life no longer framed by survival, no longer shadowed by the menace of violence. Perhaps she could even discover what she truly wanted, instead of merely what she could endure. "Thank you," she said, the words quiet but firm. Adrian turned to her. "For what?" "For catching me, for holding on, for making me think I was worth saving when I no longer believed it myself. You did the saving, Lena. All I did was offer a safe harbor for you to do it in. That's more than most people ever receive. That's because most people are let down by a system designed to protect them." A new hardness entered Adrian's tone, an anger not aimed at her. "You deserved to be helped. Then and now, what you went through should never happen to anyone." Lena rested her head against his shoulder, a small test to see if the gesture felt like too much. It did not. It felt precisely like what it was. Two people, joined by crisis and an unlikely alliance, now trying to see if it could evolve into something more. "What comes next?" she asked. "Sentencing is in 2 weeks. After that, the restraining order remains active. Ethan is facing at least 3 years in prison, maybe 5. It's up to the judge." Adrian paused. "And you get to choose what your life becomes." "What if I don't know how yet?" "Then you take your time, one day after another. There's no hurry." They remained there until the sun began its descent toward New Jersey and the air grew cool enough to render Lena's jacket insufficient. Adrian summoned Marcus. The car materialized with its customary silent grace. They journeyed back to Tribeca, caught in rush hour traffic that crept like thickened blood through the city's veins. The moment Lena stepped inside, the apartment felt transformed. Nothing had physically changed. The furniture was the same, the view unchanged, the coffee maker she'd finally mastered sat in its place. But a fundamental shift had occurred. The space was no longer a borrowed refuge. It was hers, to either claim or to leave behind. It represented a choice now, not a hiding place. Adrian lingered at the door. "I should probably go, give you some space." "Stay," Lena heard herself say. Then, because the word alone felt too charged, she added, I don't want to be by myself tonight. I don't want to just sit in this quiet, replaying the trial and worrying about what's next, and wondering if I was strong enough." "You were more than strong enough. Stay anyway." And he did. They ordered food from the Thai restaurant on the corner Lena was growing fond of, and ate from containers on the couch as a cooking competition flickered on the television. A pleasant distraction that asked for nothing from her emotionally. Adrian recounted a story about a security job in Boston that had gone awry. Lena shared an anecdote about a regular patient at Mount Sinai, an older woman who flirted with all the male doctors and served as the hospital's unofficial gossip columnist. It was a normal, easy conversation, the kind of simple exchange that had no connection to trauma or rescue or the tangled dynamic of being saved. Around 10 p.m., a wave of exhaustion crashed over Lena with the force of a physical impact. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the trial finally receded, leaving behind a profound and heavy emptiness. "I have to get some sleep," she managed to say. "I'll get out of your hair." "You could stay." The words were out before she could second-guess them. "The couch is fine, or the guest room is free. I just—" She paused, struggling to give the feeling a name. "I don't want to wake up by myself. Not this time." Adrian's look softened with understanding. "Okay, guest room it is. I'll be right here if you need me." Lena just nodded. She knew she should say more, should probably address the oddness of asking a man to stay over when they had never so much as kissed. Their whole connection was suspended in that ambiguous territory between gratitude and chemistry, and something else entirely that neither had dared to name. But she was too drained for speeches, too hollowed out for deep analysis. She went to her room and succumbed to sleep almost at once. A profound, dreamless state that comes only when you finally set down a burden you have carried for months on end. When she awoke 6 hours later to the pale light of dawn washing through her windows, her first conscious thought was not one of fear, but of possibility. The sentencing hearing, 2 weeks after the verdict, felt like a quiet postscript to the main event. Lena sat in the same courtroom on the same bench, but the pressure on her chest felt different now, lighter. The story had already been told. This was merely the final step, the process of translating guilt into years behind bars. The judge was a woman in her 60s, wearing reading glasses and a particular brand of fatigue that comes from witnessing the worst of humanity on a daily basis. She scanned the pre-sentencing report, her face unreadable. Ethan stood in his orange jumpsuit, cuffed, his expression a practiced blank. His public defender presented a lukewarm plea for leniency, citing his clean prior record and a troubled youth, the standard collection of reasons meant to make his violence seem more forgivable. In response, Patricia Reeves laid out hospital charts, police reports documenting his violations of the restraining order, and text messages that showed his escalating campaign of terror. She spoke of the predictable arc of abuse, of the high probability that Ethan would inflict this same pain on his next partner if he were not stopped, and of the need for a punishment that truly fit the gravity of his actions. The judge listened to it all, her attention unwavering. Then she peered at Ethan over the top of her glasses. "Mr. Hayes, you have been convicted on multiple charges of assault, harassment, and stalking. The evidence brought forth in this courtroom reveals a terrifying pattern of escalating violence against a person you profess to love. You leveraged your physical advantage to dominate, to terrorize, and to injure Miss Carter over a span of months. When she summoned the strength to leave you, you relentlessly pursued her, continuing to endanger her life by various means." Ethan's jaw went rigid. Lena registered the muscle's sharp twitch, feeling only a cold, distant satisfaction that his reactions were finally being judged by someone else and found wanting. "You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison for the assault charges, to be served in succession with 2 years for stalking and harassment. That makes 7 years in total. With good behavior, parole could be an option in 5. The judge did not waver. I am also enacting a permanent order of protection. You will make no attempt to contact Miss Carter by any means, direct or indirect, for the remainder of your life. A violation of this order will incur new criminal charges. Do you understand me?" "Yes." The word from Ethan was flat, yet Lena could feel the rage simmering just beneath the surface. It was the same fury that once held her paralyzed. Now it just seemed pathetic. A grown man who never learned that other people were not actors in his own private drama. The bailiff led him out. Ethan's gaze never met hers as he passed. She watched him disappear, the end of a chapter closing with a finality that was equal parts relief and profound strangeness. 7 years. He would be 43 when he was released. She would be 35. 2 different people, charting different courses into a future she could not yet fathom. Outside, the April sun was warm enough that her coat had been unnecessary. Spring had taken hold, the city shaking off winter like a dog after a swim. Patricia gave her a short, professional hug, the kind a lawyer gives a client they have come to genuinely care for. She promised to mail copies of the sentencing documents for her files. "So, what's next?" Patricia asked. Lena's gaze drifted to Adrian, who was affording her the space for a private word, but remained close enough to step in. "I don't know yet. Learn what normal feels like, I suppose. You've certainly earned it. Normal, boring, whatever you wish to call. A life free from constantly looking over your shoulder." Patricia smiled. "Take good care of yourself, Lena. I will." Marcus stood by with the car. Adrian opened her door, a small courtesy that had once felt like an imposition but which she now understood was simply his way of navigating the world, offering kindness without demanding thanks. She sank into the familiar leather, feeling the tension finally melt from her shoulders. "Where to?" Adrian asked as he slid in next to her. "To be honest, I haven't a clue." Home?" The word still felt awkward, connected to the Tribeca apartment, but less so than it did 2 weeks ago. Less like a temporary shelter. Lena had started leaving things out, no longer keeping a bag packed to flee. Books on a table, her favorite mug in the dishwasher, a succulent on the sill she was mostly failing to keep alive. "Yeah," she agreed. "Home." They moved with the flow of midday traffic, the radio playing some instrumental piece that required no thought. Lena watched the city drift by her window, trying to put a name to the emotion swirling within her. It was not joy precisely, not just relief either, though that was part of it. It was something more layered. It was like standing on the edge of a diving board, knowing you must jump, but not yet prepared for the cold shock of impact. Back at the apartment, Adrian put on coffee while Lena changed out of her courtroom clothes into jeans and one of the soft sweaters he had purchased after noting her wardrobe consisted of scrubs and 3 nearly threadbare shirts. She had protested the cost. He had gently ignored her protests. They had fallen into a rhythm with things like this, him offering aid, her accepting it bit by bit, both of them acting as if it was all far more casual than it was. She found him in the kitchen, 2 mugs ready, standing by the window with that unique stillness he carried. Lena had learned to decipher his stillness the same way she once had to read Ethan's moods. It was a survival instinct, repurposed. But Adrian's quiet was thoughtful, a mind working through a puzzle, not the dangerous silence that always came before a storm. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I should be the one asking you that." "I got there first." Adrian turned from the window. In the afternoon sun, the silver in his hair seemed more pronounced, the lines around his eyes a little deeper. He looked exhausted. Lena realized with a sudden pang that she had no concept of what the last few months had truly cost him. The time, the expense, the sheer emotional weight of helping someone rebuild a life from the ashes. "I'm thinking about what comes next," he said. Lena's stomach plummeted. This was it. The conversation she knew was coming, where Adrian would explain that the danger was over. The apartment had been a safe harbor, and now it was time for Lena to sail on her own. to stop leaning on a stranger who had caught her on a subway platform. She had braced herself for this. She had been saving money from each paycheck, browsing listings for studios in areas she could almost afford, mapping out the inevitable moment she would have to go. "I have something to tell you," Adrian continued. He set his coffee mug down. "And I need you to just listen until I'm finished." "Okay." Lena's voice was smaller than she'd intended. "These last few months with you here, it has—" He stopped, choosing his words with care. "It has been a reminder that some things are worth protecting beyond assets and clients and abstract security. You've reminded me that sometimes the most important work is helping one person put their life back together, not just managing corporate threats." Lena had no idea where this was headed, but it didn't sound like he was asking her to leave. "I have feelings for you," Adrian said plainly. "I've had them for some time. I said nothing because you were in the midst of a crisis. The power dynamic was completely skewed, and the absolute last thing you needed was the man helping you escape an abuser making a romantic advance. Oh, but you're not in crisis now. Ethan is imprisoned. You have legal protection. You are safe." He met her eyes directly. "So I am telling you now, while you are free to walk away without any consequence, that I care about you more than one probably should for someone they have known for less than 6 months. And I have to know if there's any chance you might feel the same." Lena's heart was performing a complex rhythm against her ribs. She set her coffee down before she could spill it. "I don't know what I feel," she said, her voice raw with honesty. "I can't tell if this is gratitude or attraction or some kind of trauma bond because you saved me when I was at my lowest. I don't trust my own instincts with men. I don't trust that I can distinguish between someone who is genuinely good and someone who is simply better than the last nightmare." "That's understandable, but I find myself thinking about you when you're not around. I rest better knowing you're in the other room. You make me laugh at foolish things, and you don't try to fix me on my bad days. And I've started to plan my weeks around when I think you'll be home." She paused. "I don't know if that's love or dependence or something else, but it's something." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "Then how about we figure it out together? No expectations, no timeline. You can stay here if you want, or get your own place if you need the room to breathe. We could go on real dates, normal things like movies and dinner and conversations that aren't about legal strategy or managing trauma. We can see what happens when the crisis is past and we're just two people trying to get to know each other. What if I'm a mess? What if I have panic attacks or nightmares or days I can barely function because some small thing reminds me of him? Then we will handle it. I have my own baggage, Lena. You have lived with me for months. You have seen it. The insomnia, the control issues, the fact I trust about 3 people on Earth and have contingency plans for everything, including a nuclear apocalypse." He offered a slight smile. "We are both damaged. Maybe we can be damaged together and figure out how that works." Lena looked at him, truly looked, and catalogued all the small details she had noticed for months but had not let herself process what they meant. The way he made coffee just how she liked it, without asking. The books that would appear on the shelves after she mentioned an author she wanted to read. The quiet way he protected her that never felt like control because it always came with the freedom to say no. "I want to try," she heard herself say. "I am scared to death. And I don't know if I'm ready, but I want to try." "Scared is good. Scared means you're being careful." "What if I hurt you?" "What if you don't?" Lena laughed, the sound surprising her. Is that your philosophy for everything? Just assume the best will happen. No, I plan for the absolute worst and hope for the best. But with you, Adrian crossed the kitchen, stopping just close enough that she could reach for him if she chose. With you, I'm willing to risk hoping. She closed the final few inches between them. It was not dramatic. It was not a kiss from a movie with swelling music and perfect angles. It was awkward and hesitant, and she bumped his nose with hers and had to adjust her position twice. But it was real, and it was her choice to give, not something taken. When they drew apart, Adrian was smiling, a genuine warmth in his face, the careful mask of control falling away to show the man beneath. So, he said, dinner, an actual date. I know a place in the West Village that does something with scallops that might just change your life. Are you always this theatrical about food? Only when I am trying to impress someone. They went to dinner. Lena wore a dress she had bought with her own money from her own paycheck. She felt a sense of command in shoes that were no longer for fleeing. The restaurant, a cozy, intimate space where the staff greeted Adrian by name without fanfare, was their sanctuary. They spoke of anything and everything, carefully navigating around the dark waters of trauma, trials, and toxic exes. Adrian shared tales of his Queens upbringing, the brother stolen by street violence when he was just 17, and how that single loss carved the path of his life's work. In turn, Lena spoke of the foster system, of teachers who saw a spark in her when she only felt darkness, and the strange, quiet victory of landing an IV line on the first attempt. It was normal, a blessed, breathtaking normalcy. On the walk home, his Tribeca apartment was close enough. Lena savored the city hum around her, a quiet declaration that she could occupy this space without the shadow of fear. Lena reached for his hand, a gesture she was testing. It felt natural, simple, as if it were a habit of years, not a first-time experiment. "Can I ask you something?" she murmured. "Always." That night on the subway platform. "Why did you catch me? Other people were there. You could have just let someone else step in." Adrian remained silent for nearly half a block. "You looked," he began, like someone who had forgotten they were allowed to fall. Like you'd been holding yourself together for so long that collapsing felt like a personal failure, not just a matter of physics. He paused, his voice low. "And I know that feeling. Pretending you're solid when you're just crumbling inside. I looked at you, and I saw the boy I was at 17, and I simply couldn't turn away. I'm so glad you didn't." "Me too." They ascended the stairs to her building. Lena had begun avoiding the elevator, a small act of building strength, a daily proof to herself that she could. Inside, everything was as they left it, safe, constant. The life she was forging waited for her to claim it. "Do you want me to stay?" Adrian asked gently. "Or should I head to my place, give you room to breathe?" Lena considered this, weighing what her heart wanted against what she felt she ought to want, parsing the line between need and choice. "Stay," she decided. "But maybe in the guest room for now. I'm not ready for more than this, more than holding hands. That works perfectly for me." In the weeks that followed, they fell into a gentle rhythm. Adrian would stay over 3 or 4 nights, always in the guest room, honoring the invisible lines Lena drew, even those she couldn't name. Their time was filled with dates to museums, movies, and a Brooklyn comedy club that made Lena laugh until she wept with relief. They made meals together, debating if cilantro truly tasted like soap, and learned they shared a love for the same awful reality shows. Lena returned to therapy, not the mandated crisis intervention, but deep, long-term work with a Dr. Shapiro who never tried to mend her or hurry her along or tell her to be grateful for her escape. Together, they began to unpack 8 months of torment, a 2-year relationship that was likely poisoned from its inception, and a childhood in the system that had taught her that connection was a liability. It was slow, agonizing work, the kind of healing that comes in such tiny fractions you don't notice the progress until you glance back and see the chasm you've crossed. She began to sleep through the night again. She ate without the silent calculus of whether a meal might provoke Ethan's rage. Her choices became her own, driven by desire, not by a desperate need for safety. At the hospital, her supervisor saw the shift, pulling her aside in a rare, quiet moment in the ER. "Whatever it is you're doing, Carter, stick with it. You seem like a person again, not just a ghost walking the halls." Lena let out a genuine laugh. "Thanks, I guess. I'm serious. You're more focused with patients, more present. I don't know what shifted, but it's good." The thing that had shifted was everything. But Lena just smiled and claimed she was getting more rest. June rolled in, cloaking New York in a thick, sauna-like humidity. Adrian's air-conditioned apartment became her frequent sanctuary. One Saturday found them on his sofa, a fan aimed directly at them, debating the merits of Thai versus Italian until they gave up and ordered both. "I've been thinking," Adrian said, breaking a comfortable silence. "A dangerous pastime." "No, I'm serious. I've been thinking about my company, what I really want to do with it." Lena turned to face him. "I want to change the focus, move away from corporate clients and toward protecting people who can't afford it. Survivors of domestic violence, people fleeing dangerous homes, setting up safe houses, funding their legal battles, giving them real resources, not just a map to an overflowing shelter. That's a massive change. It's the only work that feels right. The corporate contracts have given me enough capital to fund it for years, and He stopped. "Meeting you. It reminded me why I even started this business. Protection was never about guarding property. It's about letting people live without being afraid." A warmth bloomed in Lena's chest. "You're going to help others, people like me." "I'm going to try. I want to create the thing that could have helped you before you had to fall apart on a subway platform and pray a stranger would be there." "That sounds like a terrible business model. Good thing I'm not in it for the profit." Lena drew him into a long, slow kiss, one that conveyed all the things she didn't have the words for yet. When she pulled back, Adrian's eyes were dark with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Move in with me," he said, the words clear and certain. "Not as someone I'm rescuing, as my partner. We can sort out the logistics, whose couch stays, which one of us has worse taste in art. But I want you here because this is where you choose to be, not because there's nowhere else." "I have other places now," Lena reminded him softly. "I've been looking at apartments, found a couple I can afford." "I know, I saw the searches on your laptop, and you're still asking." "I'm asking because I want to wake up knowing you're in the next room. I want to come home to your shoes by the door and your mug in the sink. I want to build a life with you that has nothing to do with crisis or survival." Lena's throat felt tight. "What if it doesn't work? What if we discover we were only ever good in an emergency?" "Then we handle it, like adults. But I would rather take that risk and fail than live my life wondering what could have been." "You're incredibly persuasive when you want to be. Is it working?" Lena thought of the apartments she'd seen, the lonely studios with their sad, small kitchens. She thought the life she'd planned, one of careful, guarded independence, a constant proof of her own strength. It was a good plan, a safe one, but she was learning that safe and happy were not the same thing. "Yeah," she whispered, "it's working, I'll stay." The smile that broke across Adrian's face was worth every single moment of her doubt. They celebrated with the Thai and Italian food that had finally shown up, eating far too much and falling asleep on the couch, tangled together in a way that promised aches in the morning. Lena surfaced around 3 a.m., disoriented, her neck stiff from the odd angle. Adrian was fast asleep, an arm draped over her waist, his breathing steady and deep. She could ease away, find her own bed, and restore the careful boundary between them. Instead, she leaned back into his warmth and let her eyes drift shut. The nightmares visited less often now, and when they did, there was someone there to wake her with a soft voice, to ground her in the present, to remind her that the threat was gone. She was allowed peace. Safety was no longer something to be earned or defended. July unleashed a record-breaking heat wave, leaving the entire city sluggish and frayed. Lena took on extra shifts at the hospital, saving money she no longer needed, but kept as a bulwark against the unknown. Adrian officially launched his company's new arm, Safe Haven Solutions, a name Lena found a little too literal, though she kept that to herself. Their first case was a woman named Maria, whose husband had hospitalized her twice. Adrian's people relocated her and her 2 children to a hidden apartment, connected her to legal counsel, and helped her file for divorce. Lena watched him orchestrate it all with the same focused calm he had shown her, the unshakable belief that no one was ever truly a lost cause. "You're amazing at this," she told him late one night after a 14-hour day. "It's not enough. There are thousands of people out there in the same position you were, and I can maybe reach dozens. Dozens is not 0. It doesn't feel like enough." Lena knew that feeling well, the weight of small victories against an overwhelming tide of suffering. But her work had taught her that you cannot save the world. You can only save the person in front of you. "You do what you can," she said quietly. "You help the ones you can reach. And for the rest, you have to trust that someone else will be there to catch them just like you caught me." Adrian pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. "When did you become so wise?" "I always was," she murmured. "You just weren't listening." August came, marking 6 months since the day on the subway platform. Lena never intended to count the days, but some part of her soul kept a silent tally. 6 months of quiet, 6 months of learning that a gentle hand wasn't a prelude to a fist. 6 months of building a life that felt real, in a way she had stopped believing was possible after Ethan. They were in a grocery store, a scene so painfully normal it once felt like a battlefield, when a ghost appeared. Not Ethan. He was a problem safely caged in concrete, his release date a meaningless number in a distant future. But this was one of his disciples, Derek, the one who was there on the first night, the one who later recounted her terror as if it were a punchline. Derek's eyes met hers, and recognition curdled into something truly vile. His voice cut through the aisle's quiet hum, loud and sharp. "Well, look what we have here. Ethan's lying little tramp." Heads turned. "Heard you put him away. Must be real proud of yourself, ruining a man's life over a few bad nights." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. An old, familiar instinct screamed at her to shrink, to apologize, to extinguish the flame before it consumed her. But that woman was a ghost, too. He ruined his own life with his own hands, she said, her voice a thin wire of steel stretched over a chasm of adrenaline. I just told the truth, he scoffed. He gave you everything. He gave me bruises, she countered, and 8 months of being a prisoner in my own home. Lena stepped toward him, not away. So yes, I spoke. I told them what he did, and I would do it again. A dark flush crept up Derek's neck. He started toward her, but a shadow moved, and suddenly Adrian was there, a silent wall between her and the past. Back away, Adrian said, his voice deceptively calm, yet it stopped Derek cold. You will turn around, get your things, and you will leave. If you ever speak to her again, if you even look in her direction, I will make you understand regret. His words were a quiet promise. Derek truly saw Adrian then. Not just his size, but the unnerving stillness that spoke of a violence far more certain than his own. What he saw in that stillness made him fold. Whatever, she's not worth the trouble. And he was gone. Adrian remained a shield until the man had vanished. Are you all right? Lena's hands were trembling, but her voice was a rock. I am. I faced him. I didn't say I was sorry, not for a second. Not like I would have 6 months ago. You were magnificent. I was terrified, she whispered. Bravery and terror often hold hands. The drive home was quiet. The fear didn't fully retreat until the door was locked behind them. But she had done it. She had met a monster from that other life and had not faltered. It was proof. The healing was no longer just an idea, it was bone deep. That night, in the comfortable quiet they had built together, Lena made a choice. I want you to stay, she said, the words hanging in the air. Not in the other room. With me. Adrian looked at her, searching her eyes. Are you sure? I'm sure. I've been sure. I was just afraid to say it, but I'm tired of being afraid. I want to choose things because I want them, she continued, not because fear is choosing for me. Okay, he said. A simple word holding a universe of patience, no demands. If you change your mind, you just tell me. And so they moved with a careful grace, learning the language of trust in the quiet moments far from the echoes of crisis. There were still moments the past would surface, when a touch felt like a trap and she would pull away, needing to breathe. But Adrian was an anchor of patience, and she was learning to offer that same grace to herself. Slowly, the fear receded, making space for other things to grow. For desire, for the terrifying vulnerability of letting someone see every broken piece of you and trusting them not to use it as a weapon. Later, lying in the dark, his arm a warm, steady line around her, she felt it, a feeling she thought had been burned out of her years ago. Peace. It wasn't the absence of scars, but the simple, profound knowledge that she was here, in this moment, by her own choice, with a man who had seen her at her worst and hadn't turned away. I love you, she breathed into the silence, the words feeling new and sacred on her tongue. His arm tightened around her. I love you too, even though I'm such a mess. You are not a mess, he said, his voice firm. You are a survivor, rebuilding from the ruins of something terrible. That is not the same thing at all. You're only saying that because you love me. I am saying it because it is the truth, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. And also, because I love you. A smile touched her lips in the darkness, and she drifted to sleep in his arms. Her dreams filled not with ghosts, but with the simple promise of tomorrow. September arrived, painting New York in a light that spoke of new beginnings. Lena stood by the window of their apartment, truly theirs now, her name on the lease for 2 weeks, and watched the sunrise bleed gold across the skyline. Behind her, the quiet sounds of Adrian in the kitchen, the familiar rhythm of a life they were composing together, morning by morning. She no longer took every extra shift at the hospital. She had started to say no. She had started to protect her own peace, just as her therapist had urged. The hospital had been her shield and her prison. She had nearly martyred herself for it, and it had nearly been the end of her. "Coffee's done," Adrian called. She turned to see him, 2 mugs in his hands, hair askew from sleep. This Adrian, the unguarded, comfortable man in the soft t-shirt, this was the one who owned her heart. More than the powerful businessman, more than the fierce protector, this was just Adrian, and he was hers. She took the mug and kissed him. "What time is the lawyer meeting?" 10. Gives us 2 hours to review everything. The foundation had been his idea, a way to build something from the ashes. Safe haven, a place to offer everything Lena never had. Legal help, housing, therapy, a path out of the darkness. The nonprofit papers were filed. Today, it would all become real. "I still can't quite wrap my head around this," Lena said, a tremor of awe in her voice. It wasn't doubt. It was wonder. "A year ago," she murmured, "I was trying to sleep on a subway car because I was too terrified to go to my own apartment. Now I'm co-founding a foundation. It feels impossible." He set his coffee down and gathered her into his arms. "You survived hell and chose to build a lighthouse for others. It's not impossible. It's the most logical thing I've ever seen." "When did you get to be such an optimist?" she asked against his chest. "I'm not. I'm a realist who fell in love with a woman who proves that good things are possible." She inhaled his scent, coffee and clean laundry and something that was just him. Home was no longer a place. It was a person. They spent the morning with the documents spread across the table. Lena read every single line. She had spent too much of her life signing things she didn't understand, trusting where trust was not earned. She asked questions. She made notes. She claimed her role as an equal partner in this, just as she had learned to claim her space in their life. The meeting was a success. By noon, Safe Haven was a legal entity, with Lena listed as co-founder. The title felt heavy, like a coat she had yet to grow into. But she was starting to understand that you don't wait until you're ready. You put on the coat and you grow into it. "Lunch?" Adrian asked as they stepped out into the city noise. "A celebration." "I have a better idea," she said. "Let's go to the subway." His eyes questioned her, but he didn't ask. "There's a place I need to see." They rode the train to 103rd Street. She had not set foot on this platform in a year. She had deliberately avoided it, the way one avoids a grave. But she was not avoiding things anymore. It looked the same. The grimy yellow tile, the scent of hot metal, the distant rumble of an approaching train. The memory was waiting for her. Lena walked to the exact spot where she had fallen, where the weight of 8 months of fear had finally dragged her to the ground. "This is where you caught me," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I was so afraid that night. I thought the worst thing that could possibly happen to me was hitting the floor." She turned to face him. "But the worst thing would have been if no one had caught me. The worst thing would have been going home, staying trapped because I couldn't imagine a different life." He started to say she would have found a way out. "Maybe," she said, cutting him off gently. "Or maybe I would have become just another statistic, another woman who stayed too long, This isn't for dramatic effect, she began, her voice a fragile thing. I just needed to say thank you for catching me, for holding on, for showing me what it means when someone gives help without asking for anything back. Adrian's gaze softened. You will never owe me thanks for that. I know, but I had to say it right here where everything began. A train sighed into the station, releasing a tide of passengers that flowed around them, 2 stones in a stream. Lena watched them vanish. People just living, each one a vessel for their own quiet crises, their hidden victories, their ordinary days. A year ago, she could have been any one of them. Any one of them might be on the verge of falling, and that was the purpose of the foundation, wasn't it? To ensure no one had to collapse and just pray a stranger would look down. They lingered on the platform for a few moments more, then made their way back toward the city. The metropolis had settled into its afternoon rhythm, a beat slower, a tone warmer. It was that specific energy that follows the midday rush just before the evening descends into its own brand of beautiful chaos. Lena and Adrian chose to walk, letting the blocks slide by in a comfortable quiet, broken only by stray comments on street performers, the endless construction, and the profound puzzle of who would spend $15 on juice. Back in their apartment, Lena changed into workout attire for the self-defense class she had started in July. Adrian had proposed it with such care, understanding that any kind of physical confrontation could be a trigger. But Lena had felt a deep need to know how to fight, to learn a language of protection that didn't rely on someone else's rescue. The class was composed entirely of women, led by a former combat instructor from the military who knew that for survivors, self-defense was less about technique and more about reclaiming one's own power. I can pick you up when you're done, Adrian offered. You don't need to do that. The subway is fine. I know I don't need to, he said softly. I want to. Lena leaned in and kissed him. All right, but only because it's on your route. The class was grueling. 90 minutes of learning how to land a blow, how to use an opponent's own force against them, how to silence the instinct to freeze and instead to strike. Lena emerged soaked in sweat, her body thrumming with adrenaline, feeling a surge of strength that required no one's approval but her own. Adrian was waiting with the curb in his car. She slipped into the passenger seat, immediately launching into a description of her lesson, showing him a palm strike that made him instinctively recoil. Make a note, he said, a smile in his voice, never to make you angry. You couldn't if you wanted to. You're far too sensible. Give me time, he countered. I'm certain I'll discover a way to be irritating someday. They picked up Thai food on the drive home from the same little spot they'd frequented a dozen times, where the owner greeted them by name and always added a few extra spring rolls to their bag. These small ceremonies, this normal existence. It was the kind of beautifully boring life Lena had once believed she'd forfeited forever. After they ate, a restlessness took hold of her. Too much leftover energy from the class, too many thoughts spinning about the foundation, about the path ahead, about the bewildering fortune of building a new life from nothing but ash. Let's walk, she suggested. They found themselves back at Battery Park, the same ground where they stood on the day of the verdict. Before them, the city was a tapestry of light and sound. Ferries sliced across the black water. Visitors aimed their cameras at the Statue of Liberty, her torch a steady flame against the vast night. I've had something on my mind, Lena said quietly. Should I be nervous? I want to return to school. Not immediately, perhaps in a year's time. But I want to get my certification to teach elementary school the way I'd planned before my world became complicated. Adrian smiled. You would be an incredible teacher. Or I could be dreadful at it. I have no clue if I possess the patience for 25 children, for lesson plans and meetings with parents. So, you give it a try and see. The worst that happens is you find out teaching isn't your path, and you choose another. The best that happens is you fall in love with it and spend the next 30 years shaping minds, or whatever those inspirational posters claim. Since when are you so encouraging of my wild ideas? Since I saw that you having dreams again meant you were no longer just surviving, it meant you had truly started to live. Lena rested against the railing, her gaze lost on the water. A year prior, she had no dreams, no room in her mind for anything beyond surviving the day without being harmed. And now, she was contemplating graduate degrees and new careers, a future that stretched beyond the next 12 hours. I'm pregnant, she said. The two words seemed to stop the air between them. Lena hadn't meant to say it this way, an abrupt confession at a park railing without any warning. But the truth had been swelling inside her all day, a pressure demanding release. Beside her, Adrian became utterly still. What? I'm pregnant. Around 6 weeks. I took a test this morning while you were showering, and then a second one just to be sure. Both were positive. She finally turned to face him. I know we never discussed children. I know this is unplanned. If you aren't ready for this, or if it isn't what you want, I completely understand and we can figure out. Lena, Adrian's voice sliced through her frantic spiral. Are you happy about this? She considered his question, thinking of the terror of raising a child in a world she still found so fragile, wondering if she was whole enough to be a mother, counting all the ways she might fail at this new thing just as she'd failed at so many others. Yet buried beneath all that fear was something else, a feeling that tasted like hope. Yeah, she whispered. I'm happy. Terrified beyond belief, but happy. Then I'm happy too. Adrian drew her into an embrace, and she could feel the frantic beat of his heart against her skin. We're going to have a baby. Are you certain? Because this is enormous. And you never signed on for... I signed on for you, he interrupted gently. Everything that is a part of you, everything you hope to create, every unexpected turn this life throws at us. I am in, Lena. I am all in. She finally let the tears come, sobbing against his shoulder with relief and joy and the staggering truth that she would be a mother, that she would have a chance to give so much more than what was given to her. Adrian just held her, a solid, steady presence, exactly the anchor she needed. We need to tell people, she murmured after a while. Your friends, my colleagues. Dr. Shapiro absolutely must know. We'll have a great deal to unpack. We have time, he soothed. We'll tell everyone when you feel ready. They walked home in the quiet dark, her hand in his, speaking of the logistics of babies and pregnancies, and how the guest room would need to become a nursery. It all felt impossible and frightening and profoundly right. The following months became a whirlwind of appointments and a morning sickness that lingered all day, while Adrian devoured pregnancy books with the focus he usually reserved for security briefs. Lena shared the news with her supervisor at Mount Sinai, who offered congratulations before immediately mapping out her maternity leave. She also told Dr. Shapiro, who simply smiled and noted this was precisely the sort of development that kept therapy engaging. The foundation had its official opening in November, marked by a small event and media attention that made Lena's skin crawl. She despised seeing her face in print next to stories about domestic violence, being held up as some symbol of hope when all she'd done was try to stay alive. But as Adrienne reminded her, her story gave others a reason to believe. It showed them that leaving was possible, that a life could be pieced back together. They took on their first client that very week, a woman named Sarah, whose boyfriend had left her with a fractured jaw and 3 broken ribs. Lena stayed with her at the hospital, held her hand as she filed the police report, and helped her see that pressing charges wasn't a betrayal, but an act of self-preservation. As she watched Sarah settle into a secure apartment at Safe Haven, saw her slowly begin to believe she was worthy of safety. Lena knew why they had created this place. She understood how her own agony could become another person's lifeline. December arrived with a blanket of snow and the unique frenzy that grips New York near the holidays. At 16 weeks pregnant, the worst of the nausea had finally subsided, and her body was beginning to change in ways that felt both miraculous and deeply strange. Adrienne had grown fiercely protective of her health, ensuring she ate at regular intervals, keeping her stress in check and treating her as if she were made of delicate glass. "I'm pregnant, not shattered," she told him, after he insisted on carrying a grocery bag that weighed perhaps 10 pounds. "I am aware," he replied, "but you are carrying our child, and I am permitted to be protective." There's a line between protective and absurd. I'll endeavor to find it. They celebrated Christmas with the intimate circle of people they now considered family. Marcus and his wife, Patricia Reeves, who had become a close friend after the trial, and a few members of Adrienne's security detail who were part of Lena's rescue. There was no blood family because neither of them had any left that mattered, but a family of choice can be just as strong. Lena's most cherished gift came from Adrienne, a leather-bound journal with her initials pressed into the cover. "For writing it all down," he said. "Your thoughts, your worries, the things you might want our child to know someday about how we arrived here. I know you aren't one for journaling, but I thought you might want a record of this." She began writing that very evening. Not daily, but whenever the feeling moved her, she chronicled the mundane and the momentous. Sickness at 3 a.m, the first flutter of movement from the baby, a text from Sarah announcing she'd filed for divorce and was feeling like herself for the first time in years. January came, marking 1 full year since that night on the subway platform. Lena woke before sunrise, with Adrienne sleeping soundly beside her. She lay in the quiet darkness, considering all that had been transformed. 1 year ago, she had been a terrified, broken woman, certain that was all she would ever be. Now she was building a foundation, carrying a new life, and living an existence so far beyond what she'd ever imagined possible. It sometimes felt like a story belonging to someone else. She slipped from the bed, careful not to wake Adrienne, and drifted to the windows. The city was just beginning to stir. Early risers, delivery trucks, the ceaseless rhythm of a New York that refused to truly sleep. Her phone vibrated. A message from Sarah. 1 month in the new place. Woke up without fear for the first time. You showed me this was real. A small smile touched Lena's lips as she replied. You took the leap. I just held the light. Adrienne found her there 20 minutes later, wrapped in a blanket, watching the dawn break. Are you all right? He murmured. More than all right, just thinking about how everything has changed. Any second thoughts? Not one. He sat beside her as they watched the morning unfold. In a few hours, a foundation meeting awaited. In a few months, a child. And in the years beyond, that was a story unwritten. But Lena no longer dreaded the future. She had learned that a life can be rebuilt from ash, that love need not be a weapon, that to fall is not to be broken. February brought a letter she never expected. Prison stationery with Ethan's name on the return address. Lena held it for a long minute, Adrian's watchful gaze on her from the kitchen. The words inside were unnervingly clear. Court-ordered therapy, he wrote, had been working. He was apologizing, not asking for pardon, but admitting to his deeds. He understood why she'd fought back, was glad she was free, and hoped she had found a good life. I'm not sure why I am. Writing this, the letter closed. You owe me no reply. You owe me nothing. I only wanted you to know I am trying to be better than the man who broke you. Not for you. For whoever I am after this. I am sorry for it all, Lena. You deserved more. You always did. Lena lowered the letter, feeling only a faint, distant sense of an ending. This was likely the best he was capable of. Owning his ruin, trying to fix himself and leaving her in peace. It would never erase the damage, never undo 8 months of dread. But it was a form of closure. Will you write back? Adrian asked. No, he's right. I owe him nothing, but I hope he gets the help he needs. I hope he changes. She tossed the letter in the bin. There was no drama, no ceremony. She simply folded it and let it fall with the junk mail. Some things command no space in a life, not even as ghosts. March carried in a warmer wind and Lena's 3rd trimester. She had to reduce her hours at the hospital. Her body could no longer endure 12-hour shifts. Her back ached from the endless standing, but her work with the foundation had grown. She was now training new volunteers, creating programs, and building something that would live on beyond her own direct hand. They discovered it was a girl. Adrian wept when the ultrasound technician shared the news. Real tears he made no effort to conceal. Lena teased him for days. I have a right to be emotional, he defended himself. We are having a daughter, a tiny person who is treating my bladder like a drum. She'll be magnificent. She'll have your spirit, your heart, and your awful taste in reality shows. Hey, my bachelor addiction is your fault. I only watch it with you, you liar. They debated names for weeks. Adrian leaned toward the classics. Lena sought something with deeper meaning. They finally agreed on Elena Grace, similar enough to Lena's own name to feel like a bond, yet distinct enough for her to be her own person. Grace was chosen from the middle name, for it was something they had both been granted when they were at their lowest. April bloomed with cherry blossoms and that unique energy of a city shaking off winter. Lena was 36 weeks along, feeling immense and weary, counting the days with a mix of eagerness and dread. She had devoured every parenting book Adrian brought home, attended birthing classes, and tried to prepare for the monumental task of bringing a life into the world. Yet in the deep of night, with Adrian asleep and the city's hum a low thrum, Lena still feared she could not be a good mother, that she could not break the cycle of her own past, that love alone would not be enough. Dr. Shapiro assured her that such worry was a good sign, that knowing the pitfalls helps one avoid them. You saved yourself, Dr. Shapiro told her in a session. You built a new life from the ground up. You are creating a foundation to guide others from the dark. Trust that the very strength that brought you to this point will guide you as a mother. What if I fail her? You will. Every parent does. The aim is not perfection, but love and repair. You will hurt her feelings, and you will apologize and learn. You will make an error, you will own it, and you will grow. That is how the cycle is broken. Lena clung to that truth in the long nights, her daughter's kicks keeping her awake. Love and repair. She could do that. The first contraction began on a Tuesday morning in late April. Lena was folding clothes, the nesting urge in full command when the tightening seized her. It wasn't pain yet, just a pressure that made her stop and breathe. "Adrian," she called out, "I believe it is time." He was there in an instant, grabbing the hospital bag they'd had ready for 3 weeks. "How far apart are they?" "That was the first one? We have time, hours maybe." "We should leave now. We should wait until they are closer, as the doctor instructed. Or we could leave now and be certain." Lena managed a smile through the rising tension. "You are panicking. I am being prudent. You are panicking. It's endearing." They met in the middle. They waited until the contractions were 10 minutes apart before heading to Mount Sinai, the very hospital where Lena had spent years, where she had cared for so many patients, never dreaming she would become one. The staff knew her, calling her by name, and settling her in a room with the calm expertise of people who witness miracles every day. Labor was not what the books had described. It was a far harder, longer, and more brutal reality than any metaphor could convey. Lena had delivered babies, had seen women endure this, but to live it was another world entirely. She finally understood the screams, the pleas for relief or for mercy. Adrian never left her side, gripping her hand, speaking for her when she could not, and never flinching when she cursed him for her current state. "You are responsible for this," she gasped between waves of pain. "I know, I am so sorry. You are amazing. I love you. I hate you right now." "That is fair." 18 hours after it all began, Elena Grace Valente announced her arrival with a scream. They laid her on Lena's chest, a tiny, wrinkled being, so new and utterly perfect. Lena stared at her daughter and felt something inside her break wide open. It was a love so fierce it bordered on pain, a protectiveness that dwarfed every fear she had ever known. "Hello, my sweet girl," she whispered. "I am your mother. I will make mistakes, but I will love you with everything I have. I promise you that." Elena's cries softened, her eyes struggling to focus on Lena's face. Adrian leaned close, his hand on Lena's shoulder, gazing at their daughter in pure wonder. "She is perfect," he breathed. "She is ours." They spent the next 2 days in a hospital haze, learning the rhythms of feeding, changing, and deciphering cries. The exhaustion was profound, the responsibility immense, but beneath it all was a current of pure joy. The journey home felt unreal. To walk through their own front door with a car seat, holding a life that was entirely in their hands. They placed Elena in the bassinet beside their bed and just stood there, watching her as if she might vanish if they turned away. "We are parents," Lena said, the words heavy with disbelief. "We are parents," Adrian repeated. "It is madness, utter madness." The first weeks passed in a blur of feeding schedules, diaper counts, and snatched 90-minute intervals of sleep. Lena had known she would love her child. She had not anticipated the crushing terror that would accompany it. The constant checks to see if Elena was still breathing. The anxiety over every small sound she made. The sheer weight of knowing another soul's existence rested on her not failing. Yet she and Adrian found their way. They took turns to let the other rest. They reached out for help when they were overwhelmed. They learned that good enough was truly enough. They learned that infants are more durable than they appear and that love could fill the gaps left by uncertainty. The foundation thrived with Lena managing things from home. She had brought on a full-time coordinator, a former social worker named Michelle, who knew the systems and the trauma and how to guide people through both. Together, they had helped 43 people escape impossible situations since the foundation's start. 43 futures rewritten. 43 souls who would not have to fall and pray for a hand to catch them. Summer descended, blanketing the city in a heavy heat. Elena, at 3 months old, had begun to smile at them, her eyes tracking their movements, slowly becoming a person from a tiny, needy being. Lena would take her to the park, finding a quiet kinship with the other mothers in their shared exhaustion, swapping stories of sleep battles and feeding woes. She had stopped bracing for disaster, stopped believing that happiness was fleeting. This was her life. It was messy and flawed, built from the ruins of her past and a fierce will to create something beautiful from it. The thick August air hung heavy over the 103rd Street platform, a place Lena felt compelled to see again. Elena was warm against her chest, Adrian a steady presence at her side, right on the spot where life had pivoted. "Why this place?" he murmured. "I needed Elena to know her origin story," she replied. "Not the hospital, but the exact point I ceased my escape and allowed myself to be saved." Lena's gaze drifted to her daughter, whose infant eyes were mesmerized by the tunnel's distant lights. She thought, "One day I will speak of that night, of being so adrift I saw no shore, and of how he became my anchor." The story might sound sentimental, she knew, but Elena would understand that sometimes hitting the bottom is where you truly begin. She would learn that the right hands reaching for you can alter your destiny. Lena faced Adrian, feeling a truth settle deep within her, that love was not a weapon but a remedy. He brushed his lips against her brow. "You did the hardest work yourself." "Maybe," she whispered, "but you held the space for me to mend, and that means everything." An approaching train's roar punctuated the moment as they stepped aboard. Theirs was a journey with no destination. It was a quiet act of defiance. Lena needed this ride, with her child and her love, to prove to herself that she could. The very rails that once sped her toward horror now simply ferried her across a city she had taken back as her own. They traveled north to Washington Heights, gliding past the station that marked her former life. As they passed the stop, she felt no sting, only the calm relief of a chapter firmly closed. The haunted girl from that apartment was a ghost, replaced by a woman who knew that merely surviving was not the same as being truly alive. That evening, with Elena sleeping and Adrian lost in a book, Lena reached for the journal he'd gifted her at Christmas. Its pages held snapshots of her new life, but the central truth remained unwritten. Until tonight. The ink began to flow. "My dearest Elena, when you read this, you will see that beginnings are often deceptive. You will know the story of the platform and of your father's arms catching me when I stumbled. But our true beginning came before that, in the instant I decided I was worth more than the pain I'd accepted. In the second, I chose defiance over defeat. You were born of that single choice, from a remade life, reclaimed power, and a love I learned to accept. You are not a product of trauma. You are the living proof that our past does not write our future. Your father and I are flawed. We will make mistakes. We will fail you in small ways, and God willing, never in large ones. But we will love you with a fierce and unwavering certainty. We will teach you that to fall is human, that to ask for a hand is courage, and that you never owe your presence to a place that hurts you. We will be your example of how two broken people can build something beautiful from their pieces. You are that beautiful thing, Elena. You and this life we are building and the foundation that guides others from the shadows. This is the aftermath of a rescue. This is the face of healing itself, imperfect and scarred, but real and chosen and worth every agonizing step of the journey. I cannot wait to witness the person you become, to see the world you build with the freedom we fought for. Welcome, my baby girl. This world is chaotic and cruel, but it is worth every fight. Love, Mom. Lena closed the book, its weight settling in the quiet room. Outside, the city hummed, a million souls carrying their own stories, some captive, some free, all just trying to reach the dawn. She had reached her dawn, and the one after that, forging a life she had once deemed impossible. That night, her dreams were not of the past, but of what was to come. Elena's first steps, her first words, their foundations reach, extending from dozens to hundreds. Holidays with the family she had built, a tapestry of ordinary moments creating an extraordinary life. When she woke, Adrian was already with Elena, his voice a gentle murmur as he changed her, a private sound meant only for his daughter. Lena watched from the doorway, her future, and the man who had caught her fall. A gratitude settled deep in her bones, a part of her now. This was the epilogue to survival, the quiet peace that follows the rebuilding of a shattered world. This was life, tangled, imperfect, and exquisitely beautiful. And Lena Carter, a survivor, a mother, a founder who spun her deepest pain into a beacon for others, was finally, truly, and completely living it.